Christmas Eve. I stood frozen in my parents' doorway, watching my two children sit trembling on the floor beside empty plates. At the table above them, my sister Bianca's kids feasted like royalty, while my mother circled them with warmth and praise. Then I heard it, my mother's voice cutting through the holiday music. "Your sister's kids eat first. Yours can wait for the scraps." 35 years. 35 years of being the family scapegoat, of swallowing every insult, of convincing myself it didn't matter. But watching my 8-year-old daughter's face crumble as Bianca sneered, "Your kids aren't on our level, Ashley. Accept it." Something inside me broke. I took my children's hands and walked out. No tears, no screaming, just silence. But as my car door closed, I heard it panicked shouting from inside the house. Desperate. Terrified. They had no idea what I'd just set in motion. Because what I discovered over the next 14 months would destroy everything they'd built. A hidden grandmother they'd declared dead but kept locked away for 15 years. A multi-million-dollar family fund they'd stolen and used my identity to cover their crimes. Evidence so damning that even they couldn't manipulate their way out. They thought I was weak, disposable, born to be crushed under their golden child's shadow. They were wrong. This is the story of how the family scapegoat became the one thing they feared most, someone who refused to stay silent. And by the end, they would lose absolutely everything: their money, their freedom, their precious reputation, while I reclaimed what was always meant to be mine. Stick with me. You won't believe what happens next. My name is Ashley Reed. I'm 35 years old, a medical office manager at a busy pediatric clinic, and I've been raising my two daughters alone for the past 3 years since my divorce. I tell people I'm doing fine, and most days I actually believe it, but Christmas has always been the exception, the one time of year when I allow myself to hope that my family might finally see me as worthy of the same love they shower on my younger sister. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m. As I navigated the familiar streets toward my parents' house, my headlights cutting through the falling snow. In the rearview mirror, I could see Emma, my 8-year-old, pressed against the window with that careful stillness children develop when they're trying to be invisible. Next to her, my 11-year-old Sophie scrolled through her phone with studied disinterest, but I noticed she hadn't actually changed screens in 10 minutes. They knew. God help me, they already knew what to expect, and I'd done that to them. I'd brought them into this dysfunction year after year, hoping each time would be different, that my mother would smile at them the way she smiled at Bianca's children, that my father would ask about their schoolwork with genuine interest instead of the perfunctory questions he posed before turning his attention elsewhere. "Are Grandma and Grandpa going to like our presents?" Emma asked, her voice small in the warm car. I felt something crack inside my chest. My daughter was still young enough to believe that if she just tried hard enough, was good enough, brought the perfect gift, maybe this year they would finally love her. "I'm sure they will, sweetie," I lied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Sophie glanced up at me, and in that brief moment of eye contact in the mirror, I saw knowledge beyond her years. She knew I was lying. She knew, and she was letting me keep the lie, because what else could either of us do? When we pulled up to the house, every window blazed with warm golden light. The Christmas tree was visible through the front bay window, enormous and perfectly decorated, probably by the professional service my mother hired every year. I could see movement inside, figures passing back and forth, the choreography of a family celebration in full swing. I gathered the carefully wrapped presents from the trunk, took a breath that felt like swallowing glass, and walked up the front path with my daughters trailing behind me like uncertain shadows. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see someone walk past the door. They glanced toward it, registered our presence, and kept walking. I rang again. Waited. The December cold seeped through my coat, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with temperature. This was the old familiar ritual, the one that told me exactly where I stood before I even entered. My mother would eventually open the door with that practiced expression of mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten we were coming, as if she hadn't confirmed the time just yesterday. I positioned myself slightly to the side where I could see through the large window into the dining room. My mother moved around an elaborately set table, adjusting a centerpiece, laughing at something my sister Bianca said. Bianca stood near the fireplace in a designer dress I recognized from a recent Instagram post, her highlighted hair catching the light like a shampoo commercial. Her two children, 10-year-old Mason and 7-year-old Harper, were already seated at the table in what I recognized as the places of honor, the chairs closest to my parents, the ones with the best view of the tree, the spots where the most attention naturally flowed. My mother bent down to kiss Harper's forehead, smoothing the little girl's hair with such tenderness that I had to look away. When was the last time she'd touched my daughters like that, I couldn't remember. Maybe never. The settings for my children were visible at the far end of the table, if you could call them settings, mismatched plates that looked like they'd been pulled from the everyday cabinet paper napkins, instead of the cloth ones everyone else had plastic cups, instead of the crystal glasses that sparkled at Bianca's children's places. But even as I catalogued these slights, I realized with growing horror that those seats were empty. The meal laid out some crackers, a small bowl of what looked like yesterday's vegetables, sat waiting at an entirely different location. On the floor. In the corner. Like you'd set food out for a dog you were trying to ignore. My daughters saw it at the same time I did. I felt Emma's hand tighten around mine. Sophie made a small sound in her throat, quickly swallowed. Through the window, I watched Bianca say something to our mother. Both of them laughing, and then my mother nodded toward where my children were apparently expected to wait. Neither of them looked troubled. This wasn't an oversight. This was planned. This was intentional. The door finally opened. My father stood there, not quite meeting my eyes. "You're here," he said, the words falling flat, neither greeting nor welcome, just acknowledgement of an unfortunate fact. "Merry Christmas, Dad." I managed herding my daughters inside before they could bolt back to the car. The warmth of the house hit us immediately, along with the rich smells of roasted turkey and fresh bred cinnamon and pine. But underneath it all, I smelled something else, the particular scent of barely concealed disdain that had perfumed my entire childhood. My mother's voice rang out from the dining room, bright and cheerful. "Oh, Ashley's here. Girls, come say hello to your aunt and cousins." But her eyes never left Bianca's children when she said it. Emma and Sophie moved forward hesitantly, and I followed, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to protect them from what I already knew was coming. Then I heard it. My mother's voice cutting through the holiday music and conversation like a knife through silk. "Let Bianca's children eat first. Ashley's kids can wait for leftovers." She said it the way you'd announce dinner was ready. Casual, matter-of-fact. As if she hadn't just relegated my children to a position below even guests in this house. As if she hadn't just told them in front of everyone that they were worth less than the crumbs that would fall from someone else's plate. I watched my daughters' faces collapse. Emma's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to shed. Sophie's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump. And Bianca. God. Bianca turned to look at me with that smile I knew so well, the one that said she'd won again, that she would always win, that this was the natural order of our universe, and I was a fool for ever thinking it could be different. That's when I saw it. My two children huddled together on the floor beside those empty plates, while above them, at the real table, Bianca's children laughed and reached for golden rolls and perfectly glazed ham. The contrast was so stark, so deliberately cruel that I couldn't breathe. And I finally understood. This would never change. Not next year, not ever. The only thing that would change is how much damage I allowed them to do to my daughters, while I stood by hoping for love from people who could never give it. I stood there in the doorway between the foyer and dining room, frozen in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. My mother moved to the head of the table, adjusting Bianca's son's napkin with maternal fussing, and then she turned toward me. Her face held no malice, no anger, no emotion that I could identify as deliberately cruel. That's what made it so much worse. She looked at me the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong room, mildly inconvenienced by its presence. "In this house," she said, her voice carrying that tone of patient explanation she'd used my entire life when reminding me of rules I was apparently too stupid to understand, "everyone knows who matters more." She said it like she was commenting on the weather, like she was stating a simple, observable fact that any reasonable person would accept without question. The turkey is done. The snow is falling. Some people matter more than others. Just basic truths of the universe that required no justification or apology. I felt the words land in my chest like stones dropping into dark water, sending out ripples that touched every memory I'd ever tried to bury. This wasn't new information. I'd been receiving this message in 1,000 different ways since I was old enough to understand language. But hearing it spoken so plainly, so unapologetically in front of my children stripped away every excuse I'd ever made for her. This wasn't about my behavior. It never had been. I could have been perfect, and it wouldn't have mattered. I could have won every award, earned every accolade, done everything right, and I would still be standing here watching my children relegated to the floor because the system required someone to be less than. Someone had to be the scapegoat so that Bianca could be the golden child. Someone had to fail so that she could succeed. Someone had to be diminished so that she could shine. And I had been selected for that role before I even had a chance to audition for any other. My father appeared beside my mother, and I saw him take in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. For one wild moment I thought he might intervene. I thought perhaps he'd see what I saw: two little girls sitting on the floor like abandoned puppies, while their cousins enjoyed a feast 3 feet above their heads, and recognize it as wrong. But instead, he looked directly at me, and his expression hardened into something I recognized from every achievement I'd ever dared to celebrate in front of him. "Ashley, you need to know your place." 5 words. That's all it took. 5 words that contained 35 years of systematic diminishment. I remembered him saying the exact same thing when I was accepted to a prestigious university. Know your place. I remembered it when I got promoted at work. Know your place. I remembered it when I bought my first house with money I'd earned myself without asking them for a single dollar. Know your place. The words had followed me through every success, every moment of pride, every instance where I'd dared to believe I might be worthy of good things. Know your place meant, don't rise above where we've decided you belong. Don't succeed too visibly. Don't make Bianca look bad by comparison. Don't challenge the family hierarchy that requires you to be beneath her. Don't question. Don't resist. Don't fight. Just accept that you were born to be less, and your children were born to be less, and their children will be born to be less, and this is just how our family works, world without end. Amen. I'd heard those words so many times they'd become like background noise, the hum of fluorescent lights you stop noticing after a while. But standing there watching my daughters absorb this same poison, the words suddenly sounded different. Not like guidance from a parent, but like the bars of a prison I'd been living in without recognizing the walls. For women of my mother's generation, and even some of mine, those words had power because they came wrapped in the language of duty and tradition and family values. You were supposed to know your place. You were supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of affection were tossed your way. You were supposed to make yourself small so that others could feel big. But I looked at my daughters and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't teach them to shrink. I couldn't model acceptance of mistreatment. I couldn't show them that this was what love looked like, that this was what family meant, that this was the best they could hope for in life. Sophie, my 11-year-old who tried so hard to be tough, who armored herself in sarcasm and indifference, tugged on my sleeve. When I looked down at her, I saw that the armor had cracked. Her eyes were wide and wounded, younger than her years, and when she spoke, her voice came out small and uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since she was a toddler. "Mom," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "are we not part of this family?" The question hit me like a physical blow. It was so innocent, so logical, so heartbreaking in its simplicity. She was trying to understand the rules of a game that had no logic, trying to make sense of why some children got plates and others got floors, why some children got love and others got leftovers. She was doing what children do, looking for the pattern, trying to figure out what she'd done wrong so she could fix it, so she could earn the love that should have been freely given. And I realized with a clarity so sharp, it felt like waking up from a 35-year sleep, that I'd been asking myself that same question my entire life. What did I do wrong? How can I fix it? How can I earn my place at the table? I'd spent decades trying to solve an equation that was rigged from the start, trying to win a game where the rules were designed to ensure I'd always lose. I looked at my daughter's face, at the hope dying in her eyes, at the moment when she was learning the same terrible lesson I'd learned at her age. And something inside me that had been bent and bowed for 35 years finally snapped. Not broke, snapped back. Straightened. Stood up. For the first time in my entire life, I thought, enough. The word enough echoed in my head, but I couldn't move yet. I was rooted to that spot, watching my daughters on the floor. And suddenly I wasn't seeing just this Christmas. I was seeing every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering that had taught me exactly where I belonged in the Reed family ecosystem. I was 7 years old the first time I understood the rules. Bianca had just turned 5, and for her birthday our parents threw an elaborate princess party with a rented bounce house, a magician, and a custom cake shaped like a castle. 2 years later, when I turned 7, my birthday was acknowledged with a grocery store sheet cake and a card. When I asked why Bianca's party had been so much bigger, my mother explained patiently that Bianca was more social and needed that kind of celebration, while I was the quiet type who didn't really care about those things. The fact that I'd spent weeks excitedly planning what kind of party I'd have was irrelevant. My desires were reinterpreted, my feelings rewritten to fit the narrative they needed. By the time I was in middle school, I'd learned to excel quietly. I brought home straight A's on every report card, and my father would glance at them and say, "You're trying too hard. It's not healthy to be so obsessed with grades." But when Bianca brought home C's and B's, they'd post her report card on the refrigerator and praise her for being well-rounded and not just focused on academics. I won a regional science fair in 8th grade, and my mother's response was to worry that I was making Bianca feel bad by achieving so much. She actually asked me to downplay my win at the family dinner table so that Bianca wouldn't feel overshadowed. The pattern crystallized completely when I got accepted to Columbia University with a partial scholarship. I was 17, and it was the biggest achievement of my young life. I'd worked for years toward that goal, maintained a perfect GPA, while working part-time to save money, volunteered, led clubs, done everything I was supposed to do. When the acceptance letter came, I ran into the living room where my parents and Bianca were watching television. My father read the letter, handed it back to me, and said, "Well, you're book smart. That's not the same as being truly intelligent." My mother added that Columbia was very far away, and I was probably going to be overwhelmed there. The underlying message was clear. Don't get too big for your britches. Don't forget you're still the lesser daughter, even with an Ivy League acceptance in your hand. When Bianca decided to attend community college 2 years later, the family celebration was enormous. My parents threw her a graduation party, bought her a new car, talked endlessly about how mature and grounded she was to choose a practical education close to home. Never mind that her grades barely qualified her for university admission. Never mind that she'd never expressed any particular career ambition. Her choice was framed as wisdom, while mine had been framed as showing off. I left home at 18 and built my life deliberately carefully without asking them for anything. I worked full-time while finishing college. I saved every penny. I bought my first car with money I'd earned myself, moved into my first apartment without requesting their help for the security deposit, eventually bought a modest house through my own credit and down payment. I was proud of my independence. I thought maybe finally they'd see me as capable and worthy. Instead, I became stubborn and cold. My mother told relatives I was difficult and had always been standoffish. When I set boundaries about the way they spoke to me, I was holding grudges and unable to forgive. My success was reframed as evidence of my deficiency, proof that I was trying to prove something instead of just living my life. Bianca, meanwhile, received down payment help for her house, received a new car when her old one had trouble, received babysitting, grocery money, vacation funds, and she was praised as family-oriented because she stayed close and valued relationships. The fact that staying close was easier when you were showered with affection and support, while I'd been pushed away my whole life, was never acknowledged. Standing in my parents' dining room now, I watched Emma and Sophie sitting on that floor, and I saw my own childhood playing out in real time. Throughout the evening, I'd observed my mother's interactions with both sets of grandchildren, and the contrast was surgical in its precision. When Bianca's daughter Harper spoke, my mother leaned in, made eye contact, asked follow-up questions with genuine interest. When Emma tried to tell her about a school project, my mother glanced at her phone and offered a distracted, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to Harper. The portions told the story too. Bianca's children had plates piled high with turkey, mashed potatoes, 3 different vegetables, fresh rolls with real butter. My daughters had been given before being relegated to the floor entirely, plates with noticeably less of everything, and what they did get looked like it had been scraped from the bottom of serving dishes. The inequality wasn't subtle. It was architectural, built into the very structure of how this family operated. I heard my mother actually use the phrase "lower priority" when my father asked if he should wait to carve more turkey. "Oh, just serve the priority children first," she'd said, gesturing to Bianca's kids. "The others can have what's left." As if it were the most natural thing in the world to rank children, to assign value, to determine that some grandchildren deserved abundance while others deserved scraps. My eyes drifted around the room, cataloging all the ways this house had erased me even as I stood in it. No photos of my children on the walls, no artwork they'd made displayed on the refrigerator. But Bianca's children were everywhere. School pictures in expensive frames, crayon drawings magneted prominently, even a small shelf dedicated to Harper's softball trophies. Then my gaze landed on something I'd never noticed before, tucked behind a large poinsettia on the mantel, an old photograph in a tarnished silver frame. The woman in the picture looked to be in her 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The small placard at the bottom read, "Eleanor Reed Founder, 1985. I stared at it, confused. Eleanor Reed was my grandmother, my father's mother, but I'd never seen a picture of her displayed in this house. In fact, I'd never seen any picture of her, period. My parents always said she'd died when I was too young to remember, and they didn't like to talk about her because it was too painful. But if that were true, why would there be a photo labeled Founder, dated 1985? Founder of what? Before I could process this further, my mother clapped her hands together, drawing everyone's attention. Her smile was radiant, aimed directly at Bianca and her children. "Everyone," she announced, her voice bright with excitement, "we have important family news to share." She paused dramatically, then added with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Everyone except Ashley, of course. This doesn't really concern you, dear." My mother's words hung in the air like poison gas. "This doesn't really concern you, dear." I watched her turn away from me, completely gathering Bianca and her children closer, as if they were about to receive some sacred blessing that I was too profane to witness. And in that moment, my eyes went back to my daughters on the floor. Emma had pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself as small as possible. A posture I recognized from every photograph of my own childhood. Her empty plate sat beside her, and she stared at it as if by looking hard enough she could will food to appear on it. Sophie had her arm around her younger sister, and the protective gesture made my throat close up. At 11 years old, my daughter had already learned that she couldn't count on the adults in this room to protect her little sister, so she was doing it herself. Bianca's children, meanwhile, were laughing at something my father had said, their faces flushed with warmth and welcome, and the absolute certainty that they belonged here. Harper was picking at a second slice of pie that my mother had cut specially for her, making it extra large because growing girls need proper portions. Mason was showing my father something on his phone, and my father's face was animated with interest in a way I'd never seen directed at my children. The contrast wasn't just visible, it was visceral. It was a living tableau of worth and worthlessness, of chosen and discarded, of loved and tolerated. And my daughters were learning in real time that they belonged to the discarded category. They were learning that this is what family looked like for them, that this was their inheritance, that they should expect nothing better, because they were nothing better. I thought about Emma at bedtime last week asking me if she was pretty. I'd told her she was beautiful, and she'd looked at me with those solemn 8-year-old eyes and said, "But Grandma never says that. She always tells Harper she's pretty." I'd made excuses, then explained that Grandma showed love in different ways, that some people weren't good at compliments. But standing here now, watching my child try to disappear into the floor, I understood that I'd been lying to her. Worse than lying, I'd been teaching her to accept mistreatment, to make excuses for people who hurt her, to believe that maybe if she was just a little better, tried a little harder, she might earn the love that should have been freely given. If I walked out of this house tonight and did nothing, I would be telling my daughters that this was acceptable. I would be complicit in their diminishment. I would be handing them the same chains I'd worn for 35 years and locking them on myself. Bianca chose that moment to approach me, and I recognized the expression on her face immediately. It was the same look she'd given me countless times throughout our lives, faux concern mixed with barely concealed satisfaction. She tilted her head in that practiced way that made her look sympathetic to anyone who didn't know her, and her voice dripped with false kindness. "Ashley," she said loud enough that everyone could hear, "your kids just aren't on the same level as mine. You really need to accept reality." She glanced down at where Emma and Sophie sat huddled together, and her lip curled almost imperceptibly. "I mean, look at them. They're so withdrawn, so needy. It's not healthy." The words were designed to cut, and they did. But what struck me more than the cruelty was the desperation underneath it. I'd heard Bianca be mean before she'd spent our entire lives being mean, but this felt different. There was an edge to her voice, an urgency, as if she needed me to acknowledge my children's inferiority right now, immediately, publicly. As if my acceptance of their lesser status was somehow crucial to her own position. And I suddenly understood Bianca needed me to be small. She needed my children to be less than hers. Not because she genuinely believed it, but because without that contrast, what did she have? What had she ever accomplished that wasn't built on the foundation of my failures? She'd gotten the love and support and financial help and encouragement, and what had she done with all those advantages? She'd married well, sure, but that marriage had already ended in divorce. She'd had a career in marketing that fizzled out. She lived in a house our parents had helped her buy, drove a car they'd helped her purchase, relied on their babysitting and financial support for everything. Her entire identity was constructed on being better than Ashley. And if I stopped accepting that role, if my children stopped accepting it, her whole sense of self would collapse. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not hurt, but clarity. Crystal clear, cold water clarity about exactly what this was and always had been. I didn't say anything. I didn't argue or defend or explain. I simply turned away from Bianca, walked over to my daughters, and held out my hands. "Come on, girls. We're leaving." Emma looked up at me with shock and hope mixed together. Really, really. I helped them both to their feet, gathered their coats from where they'd been tossed carelessly over a chair in the hallway, and guided them toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice rise in indignation, heard my father call my name in that tone that used to make me freeze in my tracks. But I kept walking. Sophie whispered as we reached the door. "Are you okay, Mom?" I looked down at her. This brave girl who'd been protecting her sister when I should have been protecting both of them, and I said, "I'm better than okay. I'm done." The cold air hit us as we stepped outside, and I walked them to the car, buckled them into their seats with shaking hands. As I closed Sophie's door and walked around to the driver's side, I felt something inside me shift and break. Not breaking down, breaking free. The invisible chains that had bound me to this family, to their approval, to the hope that someday they might love me, snapped like rotten rope. I'd spent 35 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. That ended tonight. I opened my car door and started to climb in. Behind me, through the still open front door of my parents' house, I heard a sound that made me pause. A crash followed by a scream, followed by my mother's voice rising in panic, shouting something I couldn't quite make out. Then my father's voice bellowing, "Call 911 now!" I drove away without looking back, even though part of me wanted to stop the car, run back inside, make sure everyone was okay. That voice in my head, the one that had been trained for 35 years, was already spinning narratives. Maybe someone had fallen. Maybe there was a medical emergency. Maybe they needed me. What if something terrible had happened and I'd left in anger? What kind of person abandons family in a crisis? The drive home took 20 minutes, and those 20 minutes felt like being pulled apart by opposing forces. My hands gripped the steering wheel while my mind split into two distinct voices, each arguing its case with desperate urgency. The old voice, the familiar one, whispered in my mother's tone, "You're overreacting. They're your parents. They raised you. Yes, they have their flaws, but doesn't everyone? You're being too sensitive, too dramatic. Family is supposed to forgive. You're supposed to be the bigger person. If you just tried a little harder, were a little more patient, a little more understanding, maybe they'd finally see your worth. Maybe this time would be different." That voice had power because it had been installed in my neural pathways since I was old enough to process language. It was the voice that told me my hurt feelings were invalid, that my perceptions were wrong, that I was the problem. It was comfortable in its familiarity, even as it was killing me. But there was another voice now, one I'd never really listened to before. It asked questions the old voice couldn't answer. What kind of mother watches her children sit on the floor beside empty plates and does nothing? What kind of mother teaches her daughters that they should accept cruelty because it comes wrapped in the word family? What kind of mother models endurance of abuse and calls it love? In the back seat, my daughters were silent. I could see them in the rearview mirror. Emma still trembling slightly. Sophie staring out the window with an expression far too old for 11. They weren't asking what happened or why we left. They understood. And that understanding, that premature wisdom about family dysfunction, broke my heart more than anything else that had happened tonight. I barely slept. I kept checking my phone, expecting messages about whatever emergency had prompted that 911 call. But there was nothing. By morning, I was exhausted and confused, and still wrestling with whether I'd done the right thing. So I did what I always did when I needed clarity. I called Marlene. Marlene was 73. A woman I'd met years ago at a community center parenting class when Emma was a baby. She'd become the mother I'd always needed, the one who actually listened, who validated my feelings, who taught me that my perceptions weren't crazy. She'd raised 3 children while married to a man who she'd eventually admitted had been emotionally abusive for 40 years before she finally left him. She understood family dysfunction from the inside. I drove to her small apartment on December 26th, leaving my daughters with a trusted babysitter, and told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Family is who protects you," she finally said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Not who breaks you. I spent 50 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. 50 years thinking that if I was just patient enough, kind enough, forgiving enough, my husband would suddenly become the man I needed him to be. He never did. And you know what I regret most? Not leaving sooner. Not protecting my children from the same poison I was drinking. Don't make my mistake, Ashley." Her words settled into my chest like stones finding the bottom of a river. This was what I needed. Not advice from someone who'd never experienced this kind of family dynamic. Not platitudes about forgiveness and blood being thicker than water. I needed wisdom from someone who'd lived it, who understood that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. "They're going to tell you you're wrong," Marlene continued. "They're going to make you feel guilty. They're going to weaponize every cultural message you've ever received about family and duty and forgiveness. But here's what I learned too late. Loyalty to people who harm you isn't virtue. It's just volunteering for your own destruction." I drove home feeling something close to peace, or at least clarity. But when I walked through my door and checked my phone, I found 17 text messages from my mother, each one more aggressive than the last. "How dare you embarrass us in front of everyone? You ruined Christmas with your dramatics. Everyone thinks you're mentally unstable. You're destroying this family's reputation. I always knew you were selfish, but this is unforgivable. You're being paranoid and dramatic as always. Your behavior is concerning. We're worried about your mental health. You need to apologize to your sister and your father immediately." I read through them all, and the old Ashley, the one who'd existed just 24 hours ago, would have felt crushing guilt, would have questioned herself, wondered if maybe she had overreacted, considered apologizing just to make the discomfort stop. But something had shifted. I read the messages with new eyes and saw them for what they were, a tactical assault designed to destabilize me, to make me doubt my own perceptions, to pull me back into position as the family scapegoat. What struck me most was what wasn't there. Not a single message acknowledged how my children had been treated. Not one word of concern for Emma and Sophie. Not one moment of self-reflection about serving children food on the floor. It was all about their embarrassment, their reputation, my supposed instability. The messages weren't about love or concern or family healing. They were about control. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, and felt the last threads of obligation dissolve. For 35 years, I'd been dancing to their tune, trying to earn approval that would never come, sacrificing myself on the altar of family harmony, while they used me as their emotional punching bag. I deleted every message without responding. Then I blocked my mother's number, then my father's, then Bianca's. I whispered to the empty kitchen to myself, to my daughters sleeping upstairs, to the ghost of the girl I used to be, no more. The silence that followed blocking my family felt both liberating and terrifying. For 3 days, I existed in a strange bubble where my phone didn't ring, where no texts arrived to tell me I was wrong or crazy or ungrateful. The quiet should have been peaceful, but instead it felt like the eye of a hurricane, temporary calm, before something larger and more destructive arrived. On the 4th day, I made an appointment with a family lawyer. I told myself I just needed advice about protecting my daughters, about whether I had any legal standing to prevent my parents from contacting them, about how to establish boundaries that couldn't be violated. The law office was small and comfortable, and the lawyer, Patricia Chen, was a woman in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I explained the situation as clinically as I could: the favoritism, the Christmas incident, the toxic family dynamic. Patricia listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. Then she asked something that seemed tangential. "Does your family have any significant assets or financial holdings I should be aware of? Trust funds, business interests, charitable organizations?" I shook my head. "Not that I know of. My parents are comfortable but not wealthy. My dad owned a small consulting firm before he retired." Patricia pulled up something on her computer, typed my parents' names, and then turned the screen toward me. "The Reed Legacy Fund," she said. "You're not aware of this." I stared at the screen, seeing my family's name attached to what appeared to be a substantial charitable foundation. The website was professional, showing decades of history, community involvement, scholarship programs. My parents' names were listed as current directors. Bianca's name appeared as assistant director. There were photos of them at charity galas, accepting community awards, posing with scholarship recipients. "I've never heard of this," I said slowly. "They never mentioned it." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. According to public records, this fund has been operating since 1985. It's not insignificant. The annual budget appears to be in the mid-6 figures." She clicked through several screens, then paused. Here's something interesting. You're listed in the family tree documentation filed with the state identifying you as the eldest child of the fund's current directors, but your name doesn't appear in any management capacity. Something cold settled in my stomach. Why would they hide this from me? That's a very good question. Patricia's expression had shifted from curious to concerned. I'd like to pull your credit report and financial records just to make sure nothing inappropriate is happening with your identity. Is that all right? I agreed immediately, though I couldn't imagine what my credit had to do with my family's charity fund. Patricia made some calls, filled out forms, and told me she'd have results within a few days. When the envelope arrived 3 days later, I almost didn't open it. Some part of me knew that whatever was inside would change. Everything would move me from simply protecting my daughters to something larger and more dangerous. But I opened it anyway, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold as I read. There were credit lines I'd never opened, cards I'd never applied for, loans I'd never requested. My social security number appeared on applications with signatures that looked almost like mine, but not quite close enough to pass a casual inspection forged carefully by someone who'd had years to practice mimicking my handwriting. Some of the accounts were labeled Reed Family Foundation, or Reed Legacy Fund Operations, or RLF Management Expenses. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of financial identity theft spanning nearly a decade. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Credit extended using my name, my information, my identity as collateral for transactions I'd never authorized, and activities I'd never participated in. I called Patricia immediately. She answered on the second ring, and I could barely get the words out. They've been stealing from me, using my name, my credit, everything. I know, Patricia said quietly. I saw the report this morning. Ashley, this is serious. This is federal identity theft. But there's more you need to understand. She paused and I heard papers shuffling. I've been doing some digging into the Reed Legacy Fund. Your name appears on several official documents as a secondary manager and co-signatory for certain accounts. I don't think you actually signed these documents, but if they're using your forged signature, you could potentially be held liable if there's been any financial mismanagement. The implications crashed over me. They've been setting me up. Possibly. Or they've been using your identity to add legitimacy to their operations. Either way, if an investigation occurs, and given what I'm seeing, one probably should, you could be named as a person of interest, unless we can prove you had no knowledge or involvement. I thought about my parents calling me the black sheep, the untrustworthy one, the daughter who couldn't be relied upon. I thought about being systematically excluded from family decisions, kept in the dark about family business, positioned always as the outsider. And I realized with sickening clarity that my exclusion might have been strategic. Keep Ashley out of the loop so she can't question anything, but keep her name close enough to use when convenient. What do I do? I asked. We gather evidence, Patricia said. We document everything. We build a case that shows you were a victim here, not a participant. And Ashley, you need to understand something. This isn't just about protecting your daughters anymore. This is about protecting yourself from potential criminal liability. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my laptop searching for every public record I could find about the Reed Legacy Fund, about my parents, about transactions bearing my name. Each click revealed another layer of secrets, another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. A text from Patricia. Ashley, I found something directly connected to you. We need to talk immediately. I met Patricia at her office the next morning, my coffee untouched, as she laid out what she'd discovered. There were more documents with my forged signature, more accounts opened using my information, a pattern so extensive it suggested systematic long-term fraud. But before we could fully discuss the implications, my phone started buzzing with texts from people I hadn't heard from in months. My cousin Jennifer. Hey, just wanted to check in. Your mom mentioned you've been going through a rough time. Are you doing okay? My former neighbor from my childhood street. Ashley, I heard you're having some struggles. Please know I'm here if you need to talk to someone. An old family friend. Your mother is so worried about you. She said you've been making some concerning accusations. Have you thought about seeing someone professionally? The messages kept coming, each one phrased with concern, but carrying the same underlying message: Ashley is unstable. Ashley is having a breakdown. Ashley can't be trusted. I showed them to Patricia, watching her expression harden as she scrolled through. This is a preemptive strike, she said. They're trying to discredit you before you can expose them. Classic abuser playbook: frame the victim as crazy so no one believes them when they tell the truth. Over the next few days, the campaign intensified. I ran into Mrs. Morrison at the grocery store, a woman who'd known my family for 30 years. She gave me a pitying look and patted my arm. Your poor mother is beside herself with worry, she said. She told our prayer group you've been having some kind of episode, making up stories about them. It's so sad when these mental health issues run in families. I stood there in the cereal aisle, frozen by the audacity of it. My mother had weaponized her prayer group, spreading lies packaged as concern, ensuring that the entire community would view me through the lens of mental instability before I could say a word in my own defense. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Every denial I made would sound like exactly what a paranoid, delusional person would say. Every piece of evidence I presented would be dismissed as the fantasies of someone who'd lost touch with reality. For women of my mother's generation, this tactic had particular power. I thought about the decades when women's legitimate grievances were routinely dismissed as hysteria, when a husband could have his wife institutionalized simply by claiming she was emotionally unstable, when female anger or resistance was pathologized as mental illness. My mother knew this history intimately and was using it with surgical precision. Then came the family escalation. My uncle called, uncomfortable and clearly reading from a script someone had given him. Ashley Bianca came to your parents very concerned about your behavior. She thinks you might be a danger to yourself or the family. She's asking them to remove you from any legal documents for everyone's protection. What legal documents? I asked, though I already knew. The will, I think, and something about the family foundation. He paused. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but Bianca was pretty insistent. She said you were becoming a threat. A threat? The word hung in the air after we disconnected. Patricia's interpretation when I relayed this conversation was immediate. They're panicking. If Bianca is pushing this hard to eliminate any connection between you and the Reed Legacy Fund, it means your name being on those documents is a serious liability for them. They know you're investigating and they're trying to erase you before you can do damage. The desperation in their responses was telling. If there was nothing to hide, why the aggressive campaign to discredit me? Why the urgent need to remove my name from documents I didn't even know existed until a week ago? Their overreaction was proof that whatever they'd been hiding was significant enough to protect at all costs. The formal letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by certified mail, so I'd have to sign for it. The letterhead read, Reed Family, as if we were a corporation rather than a collection of people related by blood. The language was clinical and cold. Dear Ashley, as your family, we are deeply concerned about your recent behavior and the concerning accusations you've been making. We believe you are experiencing a mental health crisis and are in need of professional intervention. Therefore, we are requesting your attendance at a family meeting on Saturday, January 14th at 2 p.m. at the family home. This meeting will provide an opportunity for you to receive the support you need and for the family to address the damage your recent actions have caused. We expect your cooperation and attendance. Failure to attend will be taken as further evidence of your unwillingness to accept help. Signed, Robert Reed, Margaret Reed, Bianca Reed Hamilton. I read it 3 times each reading, revealing more layers of manipulation. The framing of concern, the assumption of mental illness, the demand for my presence phrased as caring intervention, the threat buried in that last line about failure to attend being evidence of something. Patricia read it and immediately recognized it for what it was. It's a trap. They want you there so they can shame you in front of family witnesses, get you to apologize or admit to being unstable, essentially create a record of you backing down. Don't go." "I wasn't planning to," I said, but I photographed the letter from every angle, save the envelope with its certified mail tracking documented the coordination it represented. 3 signatures all working together against me. That night, checking my email before bed, I saw a notification from a bank I didn't have an account with. "Your loan application has been approved." My hands went numb as I clicked through to see the details: a loan for $75,000 opened 3 days ago with my name, my social security number, my forged signature on every document. They weren't just discrediting me, they were still actively stealing from me even as I was uncovering their previous thefts. I reported the fraudulent loan, immediately filing paperwork with the bank and the credit bureaus, but the damage was already done to my credit score. Patricia filed a formal identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission and local police. But more importantly, the loan application itself became another piece of evidence, another thread to pull. When Patricia requested the full documentation from the bank, we discovered something that made my blood run cold. The loan application listed its purpose as Reed Legacy Fund Capital Improvement and Program Expansion. My forged signature appeared not just as the borrower, but as a fund administrator authorizing the transaction. The paperwork created a paper trail suggesting I had direct management involvement in the fund's operations, that I had approved and personally guaranteed this loan for organizational purposes. "They're not just stealing from you," Patricia said, spreading the documents across her desk. "They're using you as a shield. If anyone investigates the fund's finances, your name is all over everything. You look like an active participant." Over the next week, Patricia subpoenaed financial records for the Reed Legacy Fund through legal channels available to us given the identity theft case. What we found was staggering in its scope. The fund was supposed to be charitable, providing scholarships and community support. The public-facing documentation showed a healthy organization making regular grants and maintaining appropriate reserves. But underneath that veneer, the actual accounting told a different story. Money had been flowing out of the fund into personal accounts for years. Transfers labeled as administrative expenses that went directly to my parents' personal checking. Consultant fees paid to Bianca for work that appeared to be non-existent. Program costs for initiatives that had no documentation of actually occurring. The fund was being systematically drained, and my name appeared on approval documents for dozens of these transactions, my signature forged with practiced precision over and over again. "If federal investigators look at this," Patricia said carefully, "they'll see your name authorizing fraudulent transactions dating back nearly a decade. You could be charged as an accomplice to embezzlement from a charitable organization. That's a federal crime, Ashley. We're talking potential prison time." The room seemed to tilt. I wasn't just protecting my children or my credit anymore. I was protecting my freedom, my future, my ability to be there for my daughters at all. My family had positioned me as their fall guy so perfectly that proving my innocence would require proving their guilt. There was no middle ground, no way to extract myself quietly. It was fight or be destroyed. That's when they went after my children. Sophie came home from school on a Thursday afternoon with red eyes and a trembling chin. She wouldn't talk at first, just went straight to her room. When I finally coaxed the story out of her, I felt rage like I'd never experienced before. A girl in her class whose mother was friends with my mother had told Sophie during lunch, "My mom says your mom is crazy and you're probably going to be taken away and put in foster care because she can't take care of you properly." Other children had overheard and started asking questions, making comments. By the end of the school day, my daughter had been reduced to a spectacle, her home life and her mother's mental health, the subject of 6th grade gossip. Emma's experience was worse. Someone had found her on social media. She had a carefully monitored account where she shared her artwork and sent her messages. "Your mom is selfish. She's hurting your grandparents. You should be ashamed." The messages came from an account with no profile picture, but the language, the phrasing sounded exactly like things my mother would say. I held my daughters that night and felt something crystallize inside me that had been forming since Christmas Eve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It had never been just about me, but I'd been too conditioned to see it clearly. This was about stopping a cycle of abuse that had damaged my father's childhood, shaped my mother's cruelty, defined my entire existence, and was now reaching for my daughters with poisonous fingers. If I stayed silent to keep the peace, what peace would there be? My children were already being attacked. My identity was already stolen. My name was already attached to crimes I didn't commit. Staying quiet wouldn't protect me. It would only ensure that when the whole structure collapsed, as it inevitably would, I'd be the one crushed underneath. I met with Patricia 3 days before the intervention my family had demanded I attend. She laid out everything we had evidence of identity theft, spanning a decade, forged documents, fraudulent loans, embezzlement from a charitable fund, a systematic campaign to gaslight and isolate me, and now the targeting of minor children. The case was strong, stronger than I dared hope. If we move forward with this, Patricia said, her tone grave, we're not just filing a civil complaint, we're talking about criminal referrals to federal prosecutors. Identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement from a charitable organization, these are serious charges. Your family will likely face prison time if convicted. This will be public. It will be permanent. Your relationship with them will be destroyed completely and irreversibly. You need to be absolutely certain. I thought about Sophie crying in her room. I thought about Emma's wounded eyes reading those messages. I thought about 35 years of swallowing pain, of making myself small, of hoping that if I just endured long enough, they'd finally love me. I thought about the photograph of Eleanor Reed founder hidden behind a poinsettia. I thought about my daughters growing up with the same wounds I carried. I looked at Patricia and said, my voice quiet but steady, they chose this war. I'll finish it. Patricia and I spent the next 3 weeks living in spreadsheets, bank statements, and legal documents. She brought in a forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Ruth, who'd spent 20 years investigating white-collar crime for the FBI before going private. Ruth taught me to read financial documents the way a detective reads crime scenes, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, the small anomalies that revealed bigger truths. What we found was breathtaking in its audacity. The Reed Legacy Fund, according to its public tax filings, had distributed over $2 million in charitable grants over the past decade. Scholarships for disadvantaged students, community center improvements, youth sports programs, medical assistance for families in crisis. All of it documented, photographed, celebrated on the fund's website with heartwarming testimonials. But when Ruth traced the actual money, the story changed. The scholarship checks were real, but they went to Bianca's children and the children of my parents' friends, not disadvantaged students. The community center improvements were payments to a construction company my father partially owned. The youth sports funding went to leagues that didn't exist, their documentation created from whole cloth. The medical assistance payments, direct transfers to accounts controlled by my parents, labeled as emergency disbursements, with my forged signature authorizing each one. This is systematic fraud, Ruth said, her finger moving down a column of numbers. They've been doing this for at least 12 years, probably longer. And look here, every single questionable transaction over $5,000 has your signature. They've made you the approving authority for every crime. The fraud wasn't sloppy or impulsive. It was carefully architected, designed to withstand surface-level scrutiny while hiding criminality underneath. False receipts from legitimate businesses, fake testimonials from real people whose identities had been borrowed, grant applications that looked professional and complete, but described programs that never happened. My parents had built an entire shadow infrastructure of deception, and they'd built it on the foundation of my stolen identity. But then we found something that didn't fit the pattern. Ruth was examining the fund's original incorporation documents when she stopped and called Patricia and me over to her laptop. "This is strange," she said, pointing at the screen. The Reed Legacy Fund was established in 1985. Original founder listed as Eleanor Reed. But every document we have bylaws, operating agreements, financial records. They all date from 2010 or later. Where's the 25 years in between? Patricia frowned, scrolling through the files we'd collected. You're right. There's a complete gap. It's like the fund didn't exist before 2010, but we know it did because the incorporation date is clear. Either the records were destroyed, Ruth said slowly, or someone took over the fund in 2010 and created a new paper trail while burying the old one. Eleanor Reed. The name from that photograph I'd glimpsed at Christmas, the grandmother I'd never known, who'd supposedly died when I was too young to remember. Why would she have founded a family legacy fund in 1985, and why would my parents erase every trace of the fund's first 25 years? We need to find the original documents, Patricia said. If they exist anywhere, State Archives, the original law firm, anywhere we need them. While Ruth and Patricia pursued that mystery, I made a decision that went against every instinct I'd developed over 35 years. I stopped responding to my family entirely. When my mother called, I let it go to voicemail. When my father sent emails, I deleted them unread. When Bianca texted, I didn't even open the messages. I didn't show up to their mandatory intervention. I didn't defend myself against the rumors spreading through the community. I became a ghost present in their lives only through the absence of my usual responses. The effect was immediate and destabilizing for them. My mother left voicemails that progressed from angry to worried to genuinely confused. Ashley, where are you? Why aren't you answering? At least let us know you're okay. My father's emails grew increasingly aggressive. Your silence is childish and proves you have something to hide. But it was Bianca who made the critical mistakes. She couldn't stand not knowing what I was doing, not having control over the narrative. She started posting on Facebook lengthy rants about family betrayal and false accusations that began to reveal far more than she intended. One post read, "Some people think they can destroy years of charitable work with paranoid fantasies. The Reed Legacy Fund has helped hundreds of families, and no amount of bitter lies can change that. I know how this fund operates. I've seen the books. Everything is legitimate." Patricia screenshotted it immediately. Bianca had just admitted to having detailed knowledge of the fund's operations, making her a knowing participant rather than an innocent bystander. Another post was even more damaging. If certain people would just look at the real documentation instead of making things up, they'd see that every transaction was properly authorized and necessary for fund operations. But some people prefer drama to truth. She'd essentially admitted that questionable transactions existed, but tried to frame them as legitimate, another piece of evidence for prosecutors showing awareness of the fraud. I maintained my silence, watching her spiral, publicly creating evidence with every panicked post. Patricia was right, anxious people made mistakes, and my family was making them daily. My phone rang at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Patricia's name lit up the screen. "You need to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning," she said without preamble. "Your sister just filed an insurance claim using your name and social security number, and Ashley, the clinic, has security cameras. We have her on video." The security footage was damning. Patricia showed it to me the next morning on her laptop, Bianca walking into a medical clinic, approaching the reception desk, filling out paperwork. When the receptionist asked for identification, Bianca pulled out what appeared to be an insurance card. My insurance card, or at least a card with my information on it. The claim was for a routine procedure Bianca had undergone, billed to insurance under my name. It was brazen, reckless, and exactly the kind of mistake Patricia had predicted they'd make under pressure. "This is recent," Patricia said. 3 days ago. She's escalating, getting sloppy. That's good for us." But while Bianca was making mistakes, my mother was executing a calculated campaign that was far more sophisticated. The mental health rumors spread like wildfire through our community, carried by well-meaning people who genuinely believed they were showing concern. I encountered it everywhere, in ways both obvious and subtle. At the grocery store, the cashier who'd known me for years gave me a pitying look and asked if I was taking care of myself. At the pharmacy, the technician processing my prescription hesitated and asked if I was seeing anyone professionally about stress. At my daughter's school pickup, another mother approached me with exaggerated gentleness, as if I might shatter at any moment, and suggested I might benefit from talking to someone about family pressures. The most painful encounter came at church. I'd attended sporadically over the years, but I'd maintained a connection to the community there. After service one Sunday, 3 women from my mother's prayer group approached me. Their faces were masks of concern, their voices honey-sweet with false sympathy. "Ashley, dear, your mother is so worried about you," one of them began. "She shared with us that you've been struggling making some very serious accusations against the family. She said you're not yourself lately," another added, "that you're saying things that just aren't true and the family is frightened you might be having some kind of breakdown." The third woman reached out to touch my arm, and I had to resist the urge to pull away. "We want you to know we're praying for you. Mental health struggles are nothing to be ashamed of. So many women your age experience these kinds of episodes." The weaponization of mental health stigma was surgical in its precision. My mother knew exactly what she was doing, understood that in our community, particularly among older women who remembered when female anger or resistance was routinely pathologized, the suggestion of mental instability carried enormous weight. Every protest I made would sound like denial. Every piece of evidence I presented would be dismissed as the delusions of someone who'd lost touch with reality. I smiled politely at the prayer group ladies and said, "Thank you for your concern. I'm doing fine. You have a blessed day." Then I left before they could see my hands shaking. The social media campaign reached new heights of desperation. Bianca posted what she probably thought was a masterful defense of the family, a long impassioned statement about loyalty and false accusations. But reading it with Patricia beside me, we both recognized it for what it was, a confession dressed as a defense. "Some people," Bianca wrote, "will exploit even charitable work for personal gain. They'll make up elaborate stories about financial impropriety, completely ignoring the hundreds of families the Reed Legacy Fund has helped over the years. They'll betray the people who love them for attention and sympathy. But those of us who actually work with the fund, who've seen the receipts for every grant disbursed, who understand how charitable accounting works, know the truth. The educational grants to deserving students, the medical emergency funds, the community improvement projects, all properly documented, all legitimately authorized through proper channels. Some people just can't stand when others do good in the world." But Patricia highlighted sections as she read. She just admitted to having direct involvement in fund operations. She just referenced specific types of grants that match the fraudulent categories we've identified. She just claimed personal knowledge of financial documentation. Every sentence is evidence. The post got dozens of supportive comments from family friends, but it also sparked questions from people outside the immediate circle. Someone asked why, if everything was legitimate, the family seemed so defensive. Another person wondered why official fund documentation wasn't more publicly available. The cracks were showing. Then came the coordinated pressure campaign. Over the course of a week, I received calls and messages from 15 different relatives and family friends, each one delivering variations of the same script. My aunt called to remind me that family is everything, and blood is thicker than water. My father's college roommate sent an email about how much my parents had sacrificed for their children, and how ungrateful it was to attack them in their golden years. A distant cousin texted that I was making a terrible mistake, that I'd regret forever. The volume and coordination were obvious, almost comical in their transparency. Patricia documented every contact, every message, building a case file that showed systematic witness tampering and harassment. The certified letter arrived on a Saturday morning. I had to sign for it, the postal worker looking uncomfortable as she handed over the thick envelope. Inside was a formal letter on Reed family letterhead. They'd actually created official letterhead for this, demanding my attendance at a mandatory family resolution meeting the following weekend. The letter's final paragraph made my blood run cold. "Your continued refusal to engage with this family crisis will be interpreted as evidence of your instability and may require legal intervention to protect all parties involved. We expect your attendance. Failure to appear will result in actions we would all prefer to avoid." It was a threat barely veiled, wrapped in the language of concern. I called Patricia immediately after reading the letter. "I want to go," I told her. "That's exactly what they want. It's a trap." "I know. But I want them on record. I want their threats, their coordination, their gaslighting documented in their own words." I paused. "And I want to see their faces when they realize I'm not the same person they've been bullying for 35 years. Patricia was silent for a moment. "If you're going to do this, we do it right. You'll wear a recording device. You'll have your phone recording as backup. You say nothing that admits to anything, nothing that could be used against you. You're there to observe and document, nothing more." The intervention was scheduled for 2 o'clock on Saturday at my parents' house. I arrived exactly on time, parked in the same spot I'd parked on Christmas Eve, and walked up the same path. This time, the door opened immediately. My father stood there, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and wariness. The living room had been arranged like a courtroom. My parents sat in the 2 wing chairs at the head of the room, elevated slightly on the raised hearth area. Bianca occupied the love seat to their right, flanked by my uncle and aunt. 2 cousins I barely knew sat on dining room chairs that had been brought in. They'd assembled an audience witnesses to whatever they thought was about to happen. The only seat available for me was a small ottoman in the center of the room, positioned so I'd have to look up at all of them, so I'd be literally lower than everyone else. I looked at it for a long moment, then pulled over a proper chair from the dining room and sat at the same level as everyone else. The small act of defiance created a ripple of discomfort. My mother began without preamble. "Ashley, we're here because we love you and we're concerned. Your recent behavior has been erratic and disturbing. You've made wild accusations, you've refused to communicate with your family. You've been spreading lies about people who have only ever tried to help you." My father leaned forward. "You're being disloyal. You're an embarrassment to this family name. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. With paranoia and ingratitude." My uncle, reading from what was clearly a prepared statement, added his voice. "Ashley, I've known you since you were born. This behavior isn't like you. Your parents are worried you're having some kind of breakdown. We all are." They took turns, a carefully choreographed assault. Bianca spoke about how I'd always been difficult, and how my mental health issues had been a concern for years. My aunt talked about family loyalty and how I was throwing away relationships over nothing. One of my cousins mentioned that her therapist had said that sometimes people in crisis make up elaborate stories to explain their unhappiness. The language was designed to cut to shame, to put me back in my place. I watched them perform their intervention, feeling oddly detached, as if I were watching a play I'd seen too many times before. My phone sat in my lap, recording app running. The small recording device Patricia had given me was clipped inside my jacket. Every word was being captured. I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry or argue or beg them to understand. I just sat there, calm and still, watching them exhaust their prepared attacks. My father's face reddened as the silence stretched. "Say something. Defend yourself. Tell us why you're doing this." I met his eyes but remained quiet. Bianca stood up, pulling out her phone with a triumphant expression. "Since you won't talk, let me show everyone what we're dealing with." She began displaying screenshots on her phone, passing it around the room. "These are texts from Ashley. Look how aggressive they are. How paranoid. She's accusing us of stealing from her, of committing fraud. It's delusional." The screenshots were real texts, but stripped of context, manipulated to make my questions look like accusations, my attempts to understand look like attacks. She showed emails where I'd asked about the Reed Legacy Fund, framing my curiosity as obsessive and inappropriate. "And look at this," Bianca continued, warming to her performance. "She hasn't responded to any family outreach in weeks. She's isolating herself, which is classic paranoid behavior. She's told people that we're targeting her children, which is absolutely false. She's creating this entire narrative of persecution when all we've ever done is love her and try to support her." I watched the phone make its way around the room, watched my relatives nod solemnly at Bianca's interpretations. Through it all, I remained silent. My mother tried a different tactic, her voice softening into false tenderness. "Ashley, sweetheart, we want to help you. We've researched some excellent mental health facilities. We think you need professional care just for a little while until you're feeling better. We can help with the girls while you're getting treatment." The threat was clear: commit yourself voluntarily or we'll try to have you committed involuntarily. Give up custody of your children temporarily or we'll fight for it permanently. When they finally ran out of prepared statements and accusations, the room fell into expectant silence. They were waiting for my breakdown, my apology, my submission. They'd run this script successfully for 35 years. They had no reason to think this time would be different. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the coffee table in the center of the room. The recording app was clearly visible on the screen, the timer showing 43 minutes. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice steady, for being so honest on the record. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. My mother's face drained of all color. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Bianca stared at the phone as if it were a snake. "Every threat you just made," I continued, standing up. "Every lie you told. Every admission that you've been coordinating against me. My lawyer is reviewing this recording, along with the security footage of Bianca committing insurance fraud using my identity, along with a decade of financial records from the Reed Legacy Fund showing systematic embezzlement with my forged signature." I picked up my phone and looked at each of them in turn. "Oh, and we're not done here. Not even close." I drove straight from my parents' house to Patricia's office, even though it was Saturday evening. She'd given me her personal cell number for emergencies, and I'd texted her one word: "done." She was waiting in her office when I arrived, still wearing jeans and a sweater from whatever weekend plans I'd interrupted. I transferred the recording from my phone to her laptop, and we listened to it together. 43 minutes of my family systematically attempting to gaslight me, threaten me, and coordinate against me. Patricia's expression grew more satisfied with each passing minute. "This is prosecutorial gold," she said when it finished. "Everything we needed to prove coordination, harassment, and witness tampering. But there's more here than that." She rewound to a specific section. "Listen to your father again here." My father's voice came through the speakers, frustrated and defensive. "We did what we had to do to keep the fund viable. The organization needed capital, needed operational flexibility. We made decisions that were necessary for the fund's survival." Patricia paused it. "That's an admission of financial manipulation. He just confessed that they did something to keep the fund viable that they knew was questionable. In a court, that statement, combined with our financial evidence, shows consciousness of guilt." She fast-forwarded to another section where Bianca was defending the family's financial management. "We fixed the paperwork in 2010 when things got complicated. Everything was reorganized properly, all the documentation was updated. Ashley doesn't understand how these things work." "Fixed the paperwork," Patricia repeated. "In 2010, the exact year the 25-year documentation gap begins." She just admitted to document manipulation on the record, surrounded by witnesses who heard her say it. I felt a fierce satisfaction watching Patricia catalog each admission, each mistake, each moment where their desperation had made them careless. They'd been so confident in their ability to control me that they'd never considered I might be recording them, might be building a case, might be 3 steps ahead instead of perpetually behind. Patricia pulled up another document on her screen. "While you were at the intervention, Ruth found something interesting in the fund's original bylaws." She turned the laptop so I could see. "Right here, Section 7, Subsection 3. In the event of proven fraud, embezzlement, or willful mismanagement by fund administrators' control of the Reed Legacy Fund, shall transfer immediately to the eldest legitimate heir in the direct bloodline of the founder." I read the clause twice, making sure I understood. "That's me. That's you. Eleanor Reed founded the fund. Your father is her son. You're the eldest grandchild. If we prove fraud, which we can, you don't just expose them. You take over everything they've been stealing from." The irony was stunning. They'd spent decades keeping me powerless, excluded, positioned as the family scapegoat. They'd used my name on documents to create legitimacy and provide a scapegoat if needed, never imagining I'd discover it. And in doing so, they'd legally positioned me as the rightful heir who could claim control if fraud was proven. They'd built the mechanism of their own destruction and handed me the key. "We can file criminal complaints immediately," Patricia said. "Federal charges for identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement from a charitable organization. The evidence is overwhelming. They'll be arrested within days." I thought about it, feeling the weight of that power. I could make one phone call and watch my family's world collapse. But something in me wanted more than legal consequences. I wanted social consequences. I wanted the community that had enabled their cruelty, that had believed their lies about me, to see the truth with their own eyes. "The Reed family spring gathering," I said. "It's in 4 weeks. That's when they're planning to announce Bianca as the new fund manager, right? When they're celebrating themselves in front of everyone?" Patricia's eyes lit with understanding. "You want to expose them there?" "I want witnesses. I want the community leaders who've praised them for years to see who they really are. I want it public and undeniable. Then we go to authorities." "Ashley," Patricia said carefully, "if you do this publicly, there's no walking it back. Your relationship with your family ends permanently. Your mother will never speak to you again. Your father will never forgive you. Bianca will hate you forever. You need to be absolutely certain you can live with that." I thought about Emma and Sophie at home with a babysitter, thought about them sitting on that floor on Christmas Eve, thought about 35 years of systematic diminishment, thought about the cycle of abuse that had probably damaged 3 or 4 generations and would damage more if someone didn't stop it. "That relationship ended the moment they put my children on the floor with empty plates," I said. "This is just making it official." Patricia nodded slowly, then leaned back in her chair. "All right. We'll prepare everything for maximum impact. But Ashley, there's one more thing you need to know about this fund." She pulled up another document. "Ruth finally tracked down some of the original records from 1985, and what we found changes everything about why your parents have been hiding this." She turned the screen toward me again. "It's about who actually founded it and why." Patricia pulled up a scanned document on her screen, yellowed with age but still legible. "Articles of Incorporation for the Reed Legacy Fund filed with the State of New York on March 15, 1985. She scrolled down to the signature section. "Founder and initial trustee Eleanor Marie Reed." I stared at the name, at the careful cursive signature that had been notarized 39 years ago. Eleanor Reed, my grandmother. A woman I'd been told died when I was 5 years old, a woman whose photographs had been mysteriously absent from every family home, a woman who had become more myth than memory in the Reed family narrative. "There's more," Patricia said, clicking to another page. "This is the original mission statement written in Eleanor's hand." The words were faded but clear. "The purpose of the Reed Legacy Fund is to provide financial protection and educational opportunities for children in the Reed family who face unfair treatment or disadvantage within family structures. Having witnessed the damage caused by generational patterns of favoritism and scapegoating, I established this fund to ensure that overlooked, undervalued, or mistreated children have resources and support independent of family approval. This fund exists to break cycles, not perpetuate them." I read it 3 times, each word landing with the force of recognition. My grandmother had seen it. She'd witnessed the same toxic patterns I'd lived through, had understood that families could be systems of abuse disguised as love, had recognized that some children were designated as less than before they even had a chance to prove their worth. And she'd tried to protect them. She'd tried to protect me decades before I was born. "She was talking about my father," I said softly. "About how my grandfather treated him." Patricia nodded. "The pattern goes back at least another generation. Your father was likely the scapegoat in his childhood, which is why he became the abuser in yours. Hurt people, but your grandmother was trying to stop the cycle." I felt a strange grief for this woman. I barely remembered this ancestor who'd understood and cared enough to build a safety net for children she'd never meet. The Reed Legacy Fund was never supposed to be what my parents had turned it into. It was supposed to be my protection, my escape route, my grandmother's gift reaching across time. "So what happened in 2010? I asked. Patricia's expression darkened. "That's where things get disturbing." She pulled up the financial records Ruth had been analyzing. According to official family accounts, Eleanor Reed died in 2010 at age 69. There was a funeral and obituary in the local paper, everything. But look at these payments. She highlighted a line item that appeared monthly in the fund's expenses starting in August 2010 and continuing to the present. Every month, $4,500 paid to Riverside Memorial Services. The description alternated between memorial maintenance and legacy preservation. That's over 15 years of payments, I calculated. That's more than $800,000 to maintain a memorial. That's what didn't make sense to Ruth, Patricia said. So she searched for Riverside Memorial Services. There's no cemetery by that name, no funeral home, no memorial garden, nothing. She pulled up a search result. But there is a Riverside Care Facility. It's a private nursing home about 60 miles from here. High-end memory care, specialized dementia treatment. Very expensive, very discreet. The kind of place where wealthy families put relatives they don't want anyone to know about. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They didn't just take over the fund, they hid her. We can't prove that yet, but the timeline fits perfectly. Your grandmother would have been 69 in 2010, exactly the age when early-onset dementia might be diagnosed. If your parents got a doctor to declare her incompetent, they could have established a conservatorship, moved her to a facility, and taken control of everything she'd built. And if they announced she died, no one would look for her, I finished. No one would question the fund changing hands. They could rewrite all the documents, erase her mission, use the money however they wanted. I thought about those monthly payments, $4,500 for 15 years. They'd been paying for her care, which meant she was alive, but disguising it as memorial expenses, which meant they were hiding her existence from everyone. My grandmother had been alive all these years, locked away somewhere while her son paraded around town accepting community service awards for managing the fund she'd created. The fund was supposed to protect me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's why they had to keep me powerless. If I ever found out about Eleanor, about what the fund was really for, everything would collapse. Patricia nodded. You weren't just a scapegoat. You were a threat. The fund's original bylaws would give you standing to challenge their management if you ever discovered the truth. So they kept you in the dark, kept you subordinate, kept you convinced you were worthless. As long as you believed their narrative, you'd never question anything. I looked at that photograph in my memory, the one from Christmas, partially hidden behind a poinsettia. Eleanor Reed founder, 1985. They'd kept one picture buried where no one would notice it, perhaps because removing every trace would have raised questions. But they'd erased her from family history, from conversation, from memory itself. I need to find her, I said. If she's alive, if she's in that facility, I need to see her. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Ashley, if your grandmother is there, she's been isolated for 15 years. She may have advanced dementia by now. She may not recognize you or understand what's happening. I don't care. She tried to save me before I was born. The least I can do is find her now. Patricia's expression softened. I've already made some calls. I think I know where your grandmother is. Patricia made the call to Riverside Care Facility, while I sat across from her desk, my hands clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. I listened to her side of the conversation, professional and firm, explaining that she was legal counsel for the Reed Legacy Fund and needed to verify current resident status and billing information. When she hung up, her expression was grave. Eleanor Marie Reed, age 83, admitted August 2010. Status listed as early-stage dementia with significant lucid periods. She's physically frail but mentally present more often than not. Patricia paused, her voice softening. Ashley, the next of kin line says, none financial responsibility assumed by Reed Legacy Fund. And there's a note in her file, no family contact in 15 years. I couldn't speak. My grandmother had been an hour's drive away my entire adult life, and I'd believed she was dead. I'd stood at a memorial service my parents held for her when I was 20, listened to my father give a eulogy about his beloved mother, watched my mother dab at dry eyes. It had all been theater, a performance to cover up the fact that they'd locked Eleanor away and were using the fund she'd created to pay for her imprisonment. The drive to Riverside Care Facility the next day felt both endless and too short. Patricia came with me partly for legal support, partly because she knew I might need someone to hold me together. The facility was beautiful in a sterile way, manicured gardens, soft classical music in the lobby, everything designed to look like a luxury hotel rather than a place where people were warehoused until they died. The administrator who met with us was professional but cautious. Mrs. Reed doesn't receive visitors. We were told she had no family. Her tone made it clear she found this situation unusual and potentially concerning. That's because my family told everyone she was dead. I said, my voice harder than I intended. I'm her granddaughter, and I'm here to see her. The walk down the hall to Eleanor's room felt like walking towards something that would fundamentally change me. Patricia squeezed my arm once before we reached the door, a silent gesture of support. The room was small but comfortable, filled with afternoon sunlight. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair positioned by the window, her white hair thin and wispy, her frame so delicate she looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. She was looking out at the garden, and for a horrible moment I thought we were too late, that she'd already slipped beyond reach. I stepped into the room, my throat tight. Grandmother Eleanor, I'm Ashley. I'm your granddaughter. The old woman turned her head slowly, and I saw her face for the first time. She had my eyes, or I had hers, the same shape, the same color, even the same way the corners crinkled. For a moment those eyes were clouded and confused, searching my face for context she couldn't find. I felt my heart breaking, thinking I'd come all this way only to discover she was too far gone to understand. Then something shifted. Her eyes cleared, focused, and filled with tears. Ashley. She whispered, her voice thin but certain. You have my eyes. I knew someone would come. I knew they couldn't hide it forever. She reached out with a trembling hand, and I dropped to my knees beside her wheelchair, taking that hand in both of mine. Her skin was paper thin, her bones fragile as a bird's, but her grip was surprisingly strong. I've been waiting, she said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. I've been waiting so long for someone to find me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't do anything but hold her hand and cry, 15 years of stolen time and systematic cruelty washing over me in waves. This woman, this stranger who was my grandmother, had been locked in this room since I was 20 years old, abandoned by her own son, erased from existence, while I'd gone on with my life never knowing she was alive. They told me you died, I finally managed. They had a funeral. Everyone believed them. Eleanor's expression hardened, and I saw steel beneath the frailty. Robert always was a convincing liar. He learned from his father. Her voice wavered, mixing present and past. I saw it coming when they diagnosed me. The dementia was early stage. I was still sharp, still capable. But Robert saw an opportunity. He'd always hated that fund, hated that it judged his parenting, hated that I'd created something he couldn't control. She released my hand and turned her wheelchair slightly, reaching down toward the bed. Help me, she said. Under the mattress left side, there's a box. I found it, a small metal box, the kind that might hold documents or jewelry wedged between the mattress and box spring. Eleanor must have hidden it there herself years ago, planning for this moment. Open it, she said. Inside were documents preserved in plastic sleeves. The original will handwritten on legal paper, witnessed and notarized in 2009. The fund's original bylaws, incorporation papers, and a letter pages long written in Eleanor's careful script addressed, to the grandchild who carries my fight. I knew he'd come for the fund eventually, Eleanor said, her voice stronger now. I knew he'd use my diagnosis against me, so before I lost the ability I hid these. I gave copies to my old lawyer, God rest him, but I kept these too, just in case. She looked at me intently. You're the eldest grandchild, aren't you? The one they treat badly. How did you know? Because that's what the fund was for, to protect you. Her hand found mine again. Take these. Finish what I started. Break what I couldn't break. I held the box, feeling the weight of it, the years of planning and hope Eleanor had invested in this moment. I'm going to expose them. At the spring gathering in front of everyone. I have evidence of everything they've done. Eleanor's eyes lit with something fierce and vindictive that I recognized immediately. It was the same fire I felt burning in my own chest. She gripped my hand tighter and asked, her voice clear and determined, "Will you take me with you? I want to see their faces when the truth comes out." I looked into my grandmother's fierce eyes and said without hesitation, "Yes, you're coming with me. They need to see you. The whole community needs to see what they did." Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia, Eleanor, and I became an unlikely war council. Patricia had the documents Eleanor gave me examined by handwriting experts, forensic analysts, and legal specialists. Every analysis confirmed what we already knew. Eleanor's original will and fund documents were legitimate, legally sound, and unambiguous. Every document created after 2010 was fraudulent signatures forged with impressive skill, but detectable under professional scrutiny amendments that contradicted the fund's original mission notarizations by people who'd been paid by my parents to rubber stamp whatever was put in front of them. This is the clearest case of elder abuse and financial fraud I've seen in 20 years of practice, Patricia said, spreading the documents across her conference table. And the original will is extraordinary. Look at how Eleanor described the rightful heir. I read the section again, my throat tight. The Reed Legacy Fund shall be managed by the firstborn grandchild who demonstrates compassion, resilience, and integrity, the one who is overlooked, who succeeds despite lack of support, who protects others even when not protected themselves. This person will understand the fund's true purpose, because they will have lived the very experience it was created to address. Eleanor had written this in 1985, 6 years before I was born. She'd been describing me without knowing me, predicting with eerie accuracy the child who would emerge from her son's household. The one who would be scapegoated, who would survive anyway, who would eventually be strong enough to break the cycle. With Eleanor alive and willing to testify, Patricia continued, you have elder abuse, fraud, forgery, identity theft, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The case is so strong that prosecutors will jump on it. Your parents are looking at serious prison time. But even as we built the legal case, I knew that legal consequences alone weren't enough. I needed the community to see. I needed the extended family who'd enabled this dysfunction for generations to witness the truth with their own eyes. And fortunately, my parents were providing the perfect venue, the Reed family. Spring Gathering had been an annual tradition for as long as I could remember. Held at an upscale country club, it was part family reunion, part networking event, part opportunity for my parents to showcase their philanthropic work. This year's invitations had gone out in early March, embossed cards announcing a celebration of legacy and new leadership. The event was scheduled for Saturday, April 27th, and the local society pages had already run a preview article about how Bianca would be taking over management of the Reed Legacy Fund, carrying forward her grandmother Eleanor's vision. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe through it. They'd turned Eleanor into a symbol, a convenient dead ancestor whose memory they could manipulate. They had no idea she was alive, lucid, and planning to attend their celebration. Eleanor met with us regularly at Patricia's office, the nursing home staff increasingly comfortable with these outings as they saw how much vitality the meetings gave her. During one session, Eleanor outlined exactly how she wanted things to unfold. I want to arrive after they've made their announcement, she said, her voice steady despite her frail appearance. After Bianca has accepted her position and they're all congratulating themselves, that's when I want to roll in and watch their faces. Patricia expressed concern about the stress on Eleanor's health, but Eleanor dismissed it with a wave of her thin hand. I've been waiting 15 years for this. They told everyone I was dead so they could steal what I built. Let them see a ghost. Let them see what happens when you bury someone alive. We rehearsed the presentation multiple times. I would arrive at the event as invited, sit quietly in the back. After Bianca's announcement, after the applause, I would stand and request a moment to speak. I'd present the evidence methodically. The forged documents, the embezzlement, the identity theft. And then, at the perfect moment, Eleanor would be brought in. Patricia coordinated with law enforcement, making sure investigators would be present but discreet. The district attorney's office was already salivating over the case, but they agreed to let the public exposure happen first. As Patricia explained, sometimes social consequences are more effective than legal ones. Your parents built their entire identity on their reputation. Destroying that in front of their community will hurt more than any prison sentence. I practiced my speech until I could deliver it without emotion, just facts stated clearly and calmly. No anger, no vindictiveness, no theatrics. Just truth presented to people who'd believed lies for decades. 3 days before this gathering, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw Bianca's post. She'd written it in that breathless, self-congratulatory tone she used for major announcements, complete with professional photos of herself looking polished and philanthropic. I'm honored and humbled to announce that this weekend I'll be officially taking over as director of the Reed Legacy Fund. It's been my dream to continue my late grandmother Eleanor's beautiful legacy of giving back to our community. She built something so special, and I promise to honor her vision and her memory. Can't wait to celebrate with family and friends on Saturday. The post had dozens of likes and congratulatory comments within hours. I took a screenshot and sent it to Patricia with a single word, perfect. She texted back, "They have no idea what's coming." Saturday arrived clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for outdoor celebrations. I drove to the Riverside Country Club alone, my hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Patricia was following behind with Eleanor in a medical transport van, staying out of sight until the precise moment we'd planned. The country club looked like something from a society magazine. White tents billowed on the lawn, spring flowers cascaded from every surface, and a string quartet played something classical and expensive sounding. I recognized faces from throughout my childhood: extended family, business associates, community leaders, even a city councilman who'd been friendly with my father for decades. Everyone who was anyone in our community was here to witness the Reed family's latest triumph. Inside the main ballroom, I felt my stomach turn. They'd created a shrine to Eleanor. Enormous photographs of her, ones I'd never seen before that must have been locked away all these years, decorated the walls. A video screen showed a loop of images: Eleanor Reed, 1941 to 2010, founder and inspiration. My mother had clearly spared no expense on production values for this performance. I took a seat in the back row, deliberately unremarkable in a simple navy dress. No one noticed me. I was just another face in a crowd of over 100 people, exactly as I'd planned. The program began with my father taking the stage. He looked distinguished in his dark suit, every inch the philanthropic patriarch. Thank you all for joining us today to celebrate family legacy and the continuing work of the Reed Legacy Fund. My mother Eleanor established this fund 40 years ago with a vision of giving back to our community. His voice caught convincingly. Though we lost her 15 years ago, her spirit lives on through the work we continue in her name. My mother spoke next, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Mother Eleanor taught us that family is everything, that legacy matters, that we have a responsibility to those less fortunate. The lies flowed so smoothly, I almost admired the performance. Several guests looked genuinely moved. Then came the moment they'd been building toward. My father called Bianca to the stage. She practically floated forward in a designer dress, her highlighted hair perfect, her smile radiant. "It is my honor," my father continued. to announce that my daughter Bianca will be taking over as director of the Reed Legacy Fund, carrying forward the vision her grandmother began 4 decades ago. The applause was thunderous. Bianca accepted a ceremonial plaque posed for photographs and began her acceptance speech. I'm so humbled to step into this role. Grandmother Eleanor's memory has guided everything I do, and I promise to honor her legacy with every decision I make as director. The side door opened. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a nurse in scrubs pushing a wheelchair as if someone's elderly relative needed assistance. But then I saw faces beginning to turn, confusion rippling through the room. My mother glanced over and went absolutely white. My father's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Bianca stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. The nurse wheeled Eleanor Reed to the front of the room. My grandmother looked small and frail in the wheelchair, but her spine was straight and her eyes were sharp. The room descended into chaos. Gasps, whispers, someone saying loudly, "That can't be! Mrs. Reed is dead, isn't she?" Eleanor's voice thin, but carrying, cut through the confusion. "Hello, everyone. I apologize for being late to my own memorial service. Traffic was terrible." My father lurched forward. "Mother, you're confused. You need to go back." "I'm not confused, Robert." Eleanor's voice was steel. "I've been waiting 15 years to tell the truth about what you did." I stood and walked to the front, laptop in hand. Someone had set up a projector for my parents' video tribute. I plugged my computer into it. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The screen behind me lit up with the first document, the original incorporation papers for the Reed Legacy Fund, dated 1985, founder listed as Eleanor Reed. I let people read it before speaking. The Reed Legacy Fund was founded by Eleanor Reed in 1985. Her stated mission in her own handwriting was to protect overlooked and mistreated children in the Reed family from generational patterns of abuse. I clicked to the next slide. In 2010, when Eleanor was diagnosed with early-stage dementia, my parents declared her incompetent, moved her to a nursing home, announced she had died, and seized control of the fund she'd created. I showed the fake death certificate, the obituary, the forged will. Then the nursing home records showing Eleanor Reed alive at Riverside Care Facility for 15 years. The monthly payments disguised as memorial services. My mother tried to speak, but I continued, my voice steady. For the past 12 years, my parents have systematically embezzled from this charitable fund. They've forged my signature on documents to create legitimacy. They've claimed donations that never occurred. They've enriched themselves while telling everyone they were honoring a woman they'd buried alive. I played the audio from the intervention, my father saying, "We did what we had to do to keep the fund viable," Bianca mentioning fixing the paperwork in 2010. The evidence kept coming, slide after slide, each one more damning than the last. Bank records, forged signatures, identity theft documents, the security footage of Bianca using my insurance card. The room was absolutely silent except for my voice presenting fact after fact. I looked directly at my parents and said, "There's one more thing everyone needs to know about what you've done." I let the silence stretch for 3 long seconds before continuing. "That last thing is this: every single person in this room who enabled this, who looked away when I was mistreated, who spread rumors about my mental health, who chose to believe convenient lies rather than uncomfortable truths, you're part of why it took 15 years for my grandmother to be found. Complicity has a price, and today you're all paying it." The aftermath moved with shocking speed. By Sunday morning, the district attorney's office had called Patricia requesting all evidence. By Monday afternoon, criminal investigators were interviewing Eleanor at the nursing home. By Tuesday, the local news was running stories with headlines that made my parents' names synonymous with fraud and cruelty. Patricia had coordinated everything perfectly. The journalists present at the gathering had immediately understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just family drama, but a legitimate criminal exposé. The story went from the society pages to the front page within hours. Prominent local family accused of hiding mother in nursing home, embezzling from charity fund, ran as the lead story on every local news channel. On Wednesday morning, 48 hours after the gathering, Patricia filed an emergency motion in civil court to freeze all assets connected to the Reed Legacy Fund. By Wednesday afternoon, a judge granted a temporary restraining order. My parents' access to the fund's bank accounts ceased immediately. Bianca's credit cards tied to fund expenses stopped working. The house my parents had purchased with fund money was placed under court protection. Everything they'd stolen or bought with stolen money was now beyond their reach. The criminal investigations multiplied like a hydra. The district attorney opened files for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The IRS launched a review of the fund's tax-exempt status, looking into whether personal use of charitable funds constituted tax fraud. The state attorney general's office started examining whether this represented a pattern of charity fraud that affected other organizations. Each investigation fed the others, creating a comprehensive web my parents couldn't escape. The preliminary hearing happened on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks after the gathering. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, institutional and sterile, but it felt appropriate for what was essentially the dismantling of my family's empire. Eleanor attended, flanked by her nurse and Patricia. My parents sat on the opposite side with their lawyer, an expensive defense attorney they'd somehow scraped together money to hire. Judge Martinez was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and was impressed by nothing. Patricia presented Eleanor's original will, the forged documents, the nursing home records, and 15 years of fraudulent memorial service payments. The evidence was organized so meticulously that the presentation took less than 30 minutes. When Patricia finished, Judge Martinez removed her reading glasses and looked directly at my parents. "I've been on the bench for 19 years, and this is one of the most disturbing cases of elder abuse I've encountered. You didn't just neglect your mother, you erased her from existence while using her name to commit fraud." She granted temporary control of the Reed Legacy Fund to me pending full investigation and final disposition. Eleanor was named primary beneficiary and advisor. My parents were ordered to have no contact with either Eleanor or me. The judge also made a formal referral to the DA's office recommending immediate prosecution. My father's lawyer tried to argue that this was a family misunderstanding, that my parents had been acting in Eleanor's best interests given her dementia diagnosis. Judge Martinez cut him off. "Counsel your clients announced she was dead, held a funeral, and spent 15 years collecting sympathy while billing a nursing home to charitable expenses. This wasn't caregiving. This was systematic exploitation." Watching my parents in that courtroom stripped of their confidence and control, I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even the anger that had carried me through the investigation. Just a profound sense of completion, like watching the final credits of a movie I'd been forced to watch my entire life. The community response was even more brutal than the legal consequences. The country club that had hosted their gathering revoked their membership the day after the exposure. The church, where my mother had served on the board for 2 decades, asked for her immediate resignation. My father's business associates issued public statements distancing themselves from him. Their social media accounts, once filled with congratulatory comments and admiring friends, became ghost towns as people quietly unfriended and unfollowed them. But what really destroyed them was the flood of stories from people they'd heard over the years. Former employees came forward describing wage theft, verbal abuse, and threats. Families who'd applied for fund assistance revealed they'd been rejected despite meeting criteria, while friends of my parents received grants they never should have qualified for. A woman I'd never met posted a long Facebook thread about how my mother had spread vicious rumors about her when she'd dared to question a church financial decision. The Reed family's carefully constructed reputation as pillars of the community disintegrated, replaced by a portrait of systemic cruelty and exploitation. I watched it all from a distance, feeling neither triumph nor guilt. I'd simply told the truth, and the truth had done what it always does when finally released. It destroyed the lies that had been containing it. 3 weeks after the gathering, I was making dinner when my phone rang. My mother's number. I'd kept it unblocked deliberately, wanting to document any contact she attempted. I let it go to voicemail and continued chopping vegetables. Later, I listened to the message. My mother's voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its usual authority, reduced to something desperate and small. Ashley, please call me back. We're going to lose everything. The house, our savings, everything. You have to help us. You're still our daughter. You're still family. Please, Ashley, please don't do this to us. I saved the voicemail, sent it to Patricia for documentation, and went back to making dinner for my children. The voicemails kept coming. 3 more over the next week, each one more desperate than the last. My mother's voice deteriorated from demanding to pleading to something that sounded almost unhinged. My father left messages too, his tone cycling between rage and bargaining. Bianca sent texts that ranged from threatening lawsuits to begging me to think about the family. I saved everything, sent it all to Patricia, and responded to none of it. Patricia advised me to make my position clear, but to do it correctly. You need to respond, but not directly. Let me handle the communication so there's no misinterpretation, no way for them to twist your words. So 2 weeks after that first desperate voicemail, Patricia sent a formal letter to my parents' attorney, copied to my mother, father, and Bianca. She read it to me before sending it, and I approved every word. Ms. Reed has asked me to convey the following message. I owe you nothing. For 35 years you had the opportunity to treat me with basic respect and dignity. You chose cruelty. You had the opportunity to protect your grandchildren. You chose to hurt them. You had the opportunity to honor your own mother. You chose to imprison her. These were your choices, and consequences are not the same as persecution. I am not responsible for saving you from the results of your own actions. Do not contact me again. Any further attempts to reach me will be documented as harassment. Patricia called me after delivering the letter in person. Your mother's response was enlightening. She genuinely couldn't believe you wouldn't help them. She kept saying, "But I'm her mother. She has to help me." As if the word mother was a magic spell that erased everything she'd done. That stunned silence, that inability to comprehend that I wouldn't save them, told me everything I needed to know. They'd operated for so long on the assumption that I was controllable, that family obligation would always bring me back in line, that no matter how badly they treated me, I'd eventually fold. The discovery that I was beyond their reach was genuinely incomprehensible to them. The court required a victim impact statement for the criminal proceedings, and Patricia suggested I record one rather than appear in person. I sat in her office with a video camera pointed at me and spoke directly to the lens, knowing prosecutors and eventually a jury might see this. This isn't about punishment or revenge, I said, my voice steady. This is about stopping a cycle of abuse that has damaged at least 3 generations of this family. If I intervene now and save them from consequences, I'm teaching my daughters that family cruelty is acceptable if you apologize when caught. I'm teaching them that maintaining appearances is more important than truth. I'm teaching them to sacrifice themselves for people who will never value them. I refuse to teach those lessons. I paused, gathering my thoughts. The greatest gift I can give my children is showing them that people who hurt you don't automatically deserve your protection, no matter what they call themselves. My parents had 35 years to change. They chose not to. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to shield them from the consequences of choices they made freely and repeatedly. When I finished, Patricia turned off the camera and said quietly, "That's going to be very powerful in court." The extended Reed family fractured along predictable lines. My mother's sisters stopped speaking to me entirely, sending messages through others that I was destroying the family name and would regret this forever. Several cousins I barely knew posted vague Facebook statuses about loyalty and betrayal, clearly aimed at me, though never naming me directly. But others surprised me. My Uncle James, my father's younger brother, called me one evening. His voice was hesitant but warm. "Ashley, I wanted you to know that Martha and I stopped going to family events about 8 years ago. We couldn't stand watching how they treated you anymore. We tried talking to your father about it once, and he basically told us to mind our business or stop coming around. So we stopped coming around." I was silent, processing this. "You saw it. Everyone saw it, Ashley. Some people just chose to pretend they didn't because confronting it would have been uncomfortable. He paused. My lawyer said your lawyer might want witnesses to the pattern of favoritism and abuse. I'll testify if you need me to, so will Martha. We should have stood up years ago. I'm sorry we didn't. That validation, knowing that I hadn't imagined it, that others had witnessed the systematic mistreatment and recognized it as wrong, was unexpectedly healing. It confirmed that my reality had been real, that the gaslighting had been the lie, that my perceptions had been accurate all along. Other relatives reached out with similar messages. A cousin I'd liked as a child apologized for not speaking up when she saw how differently Bianca and I were treated. An aunt on my mother's side admitted she'd always found my mother's treatment of me troubling, but had convinced herself it wasn't her place to interfere. The silence that had enabled the abuse for decades was finally breaking, and with it came both validation and the painful recognition of how many people had looked away. But I also understood that their silence, however well-intentioned, had been a form of participation. Evil doesn't need active perpetrators when it has passive enablers. Every relative who saw the mistreatment and said nothing, who witnessed the favoritism and shrugged, who heard my mother spreading lies about my mental health and didn't challenge her, they'd all been part of the machinery that kept me trapped. I was meeting with Patricia to review testimony transcripts when my office receptionist called my cell. Ashley, your mother is here. She's saying it's an emergency and she needs to see you. She looks not well. I felt my stomach drop. Tell her I can't meet with her. Tell her all communication goes through my attorney. I tried. She's refusing to leave. She says there's something you don't understand about your family, about why you were treated differently. She says there's a reason and you need to know it. I called Patricia immediately. My mother is at my office. She says there's information I need to know, something about why I was treated differently. I paused. I think I should hear this, but not alone. Patricia was firm. Public place. I'm present. You say nothing that could be construed as reconciliation or accepting responsibility for their situation. This is information gathering only. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my office, chosen specifically because it was busy and neutral. My mother arrived looking like she'd aged a decade in the past month. Her hair, usually immaculate, showed gray roots. Her clothes, typically designer perfect, looked rumpled. But it was her eyes that shocked me. They were hollow, defeated, nothing like the cold authority I'd known my entire life. Patricia made the ground rules clear before we even sat down. Mrs. Reed, you have 30 minutes. Ashley is here to listen only. This is not a negotiation, not a reconciliation, not an opportunity to change her mind about anything. If you deviate from providing information, this meeting ends immediately. My mother nodded, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. She looked at me for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You think I don't understand what I did to you, but I do. I understand because it was done to me. She took a shaky breath. My mother, your grandmother, that you never knew she was cruel in ways that make me look merciful. I had an older sister, Rachel. She was the golden child. I was the scapegoat. Everything I did was wrong. Everything Rachel did was perfect. When I brought home straight A's, Mother said I was showing off and making Rachel feel bad. When Rachel brought home C's, Mother praised her for being well-rounded. I sat very still, not wanting to interrupt, but feeling something shift in my understanding. I was told daily that I was difficult, ungrateful, too smart for my own good. When I got accepted to a good college, Mother said I was abandoning the family. When I wanted to study psychology, she said I was trying to make everyone think they were crazy. By the time I met your father, I was so desperate to escape that family that I would have married anyone who offered me a way out. She looked down at her untouched coffee. But your father, he'd been damaged too. His father, your grandfather, treated him the same way I'd been treated. Constant criticism, impossible standards, always being compared unfavorably to his brother. We were 2 broken people who thought we could fix each other. Instead, we just broke each other worse. And when I was born, I asked quietly, My mother's face crumpled. When you were born, you were exactly what I'd been before they broke me. Strong-willed, independent, confident. You didn't need our approval to feel good about yourself. You just existed fully formed completely yourself. And watching you succeed without shrinking yourself, watching you stand up for what you wanted, watching you refuse to be diminished. It was like looking at who I could have been if I'd been brave enough to fight. Her voice broke. I couldn't let you be free when I was never free. Every time you succeeded, it felt like an accusation. Every time you stood tall, it reminded me of how much I'd bent. Every time you refused to accept their treatment, it showed me that I could have refused too, and I chose not to. You were a mirror showing me everything I'd killed in myself to survive, and I hated you for it. The confession hung in the air between us. I felt a complex tangle of emotions: grief for the child my mother had been, anger at the adult she'd become, and a strange, sad understanding of how trauma cascades through generations, twisting people into shapes they never intended to be. Is this an apology? I asked. No. My mother looked at me directly for the first time. I don't think I can apologize for something I'm not sure I could have done differently. I'm explaining. I'm trying to make you understand that this isn't about you being deficient. It never was. It was about me being broken. Patricia shifted beside me, but I held up a hand. I needed to say this. I'm genuinely sorry for what happened to you, I said carefully. No child deserves what you experienced. Your mother was cruel and you deserved better. But Mom, you had choices I didn't have. You grew up in the 70s and 80s when feminism was changing the world, when therapy became mainstream, when books about breaking family patterns were everywhere. You had resources. You had options. I leaned forward slightly. More importantly, you had me. You had a daughter who would have loved you if you'd let her, who would have supported you if you'd been vulnerable enough to share your pain, who tried desperately year after year to earn your approval and affection. You could have broken the cycle with me. You could have said, I won't do to my daughter what was done to me. You could have been the generation that stopped this. My voice didn't shake. But you didn't. You chose to replicate the abuse. You chose to make me suffer for your pain. And understanding why you made that choice doesn't change the fact that you made it. Empathy isn't the same as absolution. My mother's face went through several expressions: shock, denial, grief, and finally something that looked like recognition. Maybe the first real recognition she'd had in years. I stood up. I'm sorry for what was done to you. But I'm not sorry for protecting my daughters from what you did to me. That ends with me. I turned to leave, and my mother's voice, desperate now, called after me. Wait, there's something else. About Bianca's daughter. You need to see something. I turned back to my mother. What about Emma? My mother's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos with the desperation of someone playing their last card. Just look, please, just look at these. She showed me photos from a recent family birthday party, one I hadn't been invited to naturally. In every picture, the pattern was visible if you knew what to look for. Bianca's son Mason, front and center, beaming, surrounded by adults giving him attention. And off to the side, sometimes literally in the background, was 8-year-old Emma. In one photo, Emma sat alone at the edge of the frame while everyone else clustered around Mason. In another, she was serving food to other children while her own plate remained empty. In a third, she stood with her shoulders curved inward, making herself small, an expression on her face that I recognized instantly because I'd worn it for 35 years. It's happening again, my mother whispered. I tried to tell Bianca, but she can't see it, or won't see it. And I don't know how to make her understand, because if I'm honest about what I see in those pictures, I have to be honest about what I did to you. I looked at those images and felt something break open in my chest. Not for my mother, but for Emma. An 8-year-old girl who was being taught right now in real time that she mattered less than her brother, that her needs were secondary, that she should shrink herself to make others comfortable. The cycle was continuing, passed from my grandmother to my mother to me, and now reaching for the next generation through Bianca. "I need to see this in person," I said. Patricia objected initially, but there was a court-mandated family meeting scheduled the following week as part of the custody arrangements in Bianca's divorce. As the children's aunt and now director of the Reed Legacy Fund, I had standing to attend. Patricia came with me, and we sat in a conference room with a court-appointed mediator, while Bianca met with both children. Watching Bianca with Emma and Mason was like watching a documentary of my own childhood. When Mason spoke, Bianca leaned in, made eye contact, responded with warmth and interest. When Emma tried to contribute to the conversation, Bianca's attention wandered. Her responses were distracted and brief. "That's nice, honey. Mason, tell me more about your project." When snacks were brought in, Bianca handed Mason the first plate and helped him select what he wanted. Emma waited, standing off to the side until everyone else had been served, then took what was left. She didn't complain. She didn't even look disappointed. She just accepted it as normal. At one point, both children answered a question the mediator asked about their preferred custody schedule. Mason gave a long, detailed answer about wanting specific days with each parent. Bianca smiled and said, "That's very mature thinking, Mason. You're so thoughtful about what you need." When Emma started to share her preference, Bianca interrupted, "Let your brother finish, Emma. You'll get a turn." But Emma's turn never came. The conversation moved on, and her preference was never heard. The body language told the story. Emma sat with her shoulders rolled forward, taking up as little space as possible. She apologized 3 times during the hour-long meeting, once when she accidentally bumped the table, once when she asked to use the bathroom, once when she simply existed in a space someone else wanted to move through. Her brother didn't apologize once, moved through the world with the confidence of a child who knew he was welcomed and valued. After the meeting ended and the children left with their father, I asked Bianca to stay. Patricia was present, as was the mediator, which made it official and documented. But I spoke to Bianca sister to sister, person to person, in a way I'd never been able to before. "Look at Emma," I said quietly. "Really look at her. She sits the way I used to sit. She apologizes constantly for existing. She makes herself small so she won't take up space anyone else might want. You're doing to her exactly what Mom and Dad did to me." Bianca's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. I love both my children equally. Just because I don't make a big show of—" "She waited to eat until everyone else was served," I interrupted. "She apologized for needing to use the bathroom. When she tried to share her custody preference, you told her to let Mason finish, and then her preference was never heard. Do you know what that teaches her? That what she wants doesn't matter. That her needs are less important than her brother's. That she should shrink herself to make room for him." "I don't—" Bianca started, but I could see the defense crumbling in her eyes. "Her body language, Bianca. She flinches when she thinks she might be criticized. She makes herself physically smaller when adults enter the room. She's 8 years old and she's already learned to disappear. I know because I learned it at the same age in the same family from the same patterns you're using now." Bianca's face went through several transformations. Denial, anger, recognition, horror. "I didn't. I thought I was doing better than them. I swore I'd never be like them." "Better than them is a very low bar," I said, not unkindly. "And the patterns go deeper than we think. They get into your bones. You don't consciously choose them, you just find yourself doing what was done to you because it's the only model you have." Bianca's facade shattered. She put her face in her hands and sobbed in a way I'd never seen her cry before. Not the performative tears she'd used to manipulate situations, but genuine, wrenching grief. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I thought I was being a good mother." I felt something unexpected compassion. Not for the Bianca who'd tormented me our entire lives, but for the mother who was just now realizing she'd been hurting her daughter. "This has to stop," I said firmly. "Not just for my kids, for Emma, for all of us. The cycle ends now." Bianca looked up at me, her face swollen and blotchy. "Can you teach me how to stop? I don't even know where to start." I looked at Bianca across that conference table, seeing her not as the golden child who'd tormented me for decades, but as a flawed person capable of change if given the right structure and accountability. But I also knew that good intentions meant nothing without concrete action and clear boundaries. "If I'm going to help you," I said carefully, "we need to be absolutely clear about what this is and isn't. This isn't reconciliation. This isn't us becoming close sisters. This isn't me forgiving everything you've done. This is a focused, limited intervention for Emma's benefit. Are we clear?" Bianca nodded, wiping her face. "Yes, I understand." "Here are my conditions," I continued. "First, you start individual therapy immediately with a specialist in family systems abuse and generational trauma. Not a general therapist, not a marriage counselor, someone who specifically understands scapegoat and golden child dynamics. I'll give you names, but you have to commit to at least 6 months weekly sessions, and you have to do the work they assign." "Okay," Bianca said quietly. "Second, you acknowledge to Emma directly and in writing that you've been treating her unfairly compared to her brother. You don't make excuses, you don't blame your upbringing, you don't minimize what you've done. You own it, you apologize, and you tell her what you're doing to change." Bianca's face went pale at this, but she nodded. "That's going to be hard." "It should be hard. Emma deserves to hear that she wasn't imagining the differential treatment, that it wasn't her fault, and that you're committed to stopping it. Third, I said you commit to specific behavioral changes with accountability. I want weekly check-ins for the first 3 months where you report what you're working on in therapy and how you're implementing changes with Emma. If I see you backsliding, I'm going to call it out. If you get defensive or make excuses, this arrangement ends." Patricia, sitting beside me, added, "And I'll be documenting everything. If there's evidence that Emma continues to be mistreated, it becomes part of the custody evaluation." Bianca flinched but nodded. "I understand. I want to do this. I have to do this." "Finally," I said, "understand what I will and won't provide. I'll give you resources, book recommendations, therapist names, parenting workshops that focus on breaking toxic patterns. I'll answer specific questions about how to recognize and interrupt the behaviors. But I won't be your emotional support. I won't comfort you when you feel bad about realizing what you've done. I won't be your friend or your confidant. This is transactional and bounded. For Emma." For the first time in our lives, I was setting clear expectations with my sister. Expectations based on what was needed rather than what roles we'd been assigned at birth. Bianca agreed to everything, and we put it in writing that same day, a contract of sorts witnessed by Patricia and the mediator, outlining exactly what this limited alliance would look like. The first therapist on my list specialized in family systems and generational trauma. I'd already vetted her, explained the situation, and confirmed she had immediate availability. Bianca started sessions the following week. I wasn't privy to what happened in those sessions that was between Bianca and her therapist, but I saw the effects. In our weekly check-ins, Bianca started unpacking layers she'd never examined before. My therapist asked me if I ever felt loved for who I was or just for what I did, she told me during our third meeting. And I realized, I don't think I know the difference. Every time Mom praised me, it was for achieving something, for being better than someone else, for maintaining the image. I don't remember ever being praised just for existing. She described the pressure of being the golden child, the constant performance, the inability to fail without devastating the family narrative, the isolation of being pitted against me. I couldn't be friends with you because that would have disrupted the dynamic. I couldn't show weakness because I was supposed to be the strong one. I couldn't have my own struggles because I was supposed to be proof that Mom and Dad's parenting worked. Being the favorite wasn't love, Bianca said, her voice cracking. It was conditional approval based on maintaining a hierarchy that required someone else to be beneath me. And I didn't realize that until I saw myself doing the same thing to Emma. These realizations didn't excuse her behavior toward me, and I made that clear. Understanding why you did something doesn't erase the harm it caused, I told her, but it can help you make different choices going forward. The letter Bianca wrote to Emma was painful to witness. She sat at my kitchen table, neutral territory we'd agreed on, and drafted it by hand while I watched. She went through 4 versions before she got it right, before she stopped trying to soften the truth or explain away her actions. The final version said, "Dear Emma, I need to tell you something important. I've been treating you differently than your brother, and that was wrong. You are not less important than Mason. Your needs matter just as much as his. Your voice deserves to be heard. I'm sorry that I made you feel like you had to be smaller, quieter, less important. That was my mistake, not yours. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm working with a therapist to understand why I did this and how to change. You deserve better, and I'm going to do better. I love you for who you are, not for what you do or how you compare to anyone else. I'm sorry it took me so long to say that. Love, Mom." When Bianca read it to Emma, I wasn't present. That moment belonged to them. But Bianca called me afterward crying. She asked me if I really meant it or if it was just words. She's 8 years old and she already knows the difference between real apologies and fake ones. "What did you tell her?" I asked. I told her she'd have to watch what I do, not just what I say. That I was going to prove it with my actions. That's when Eleanor asked to be involved. She'd been following the situation from her apartment in an assisted living facility, a proper one this time, one she'd chosen with windows that opened and doors she could walk through whenever she wanted. Patricia had arranged her transfer within a week of the court granting Ashley temporary control of the fund. Eleanor invited both Bianca and me to lunch, and what she shared changed how I understood our entire family history. "Your grandfather, Bianca, and Ashley's grandfather was a cruel man," Eleanor began. "He did to your father exactly what your father did to Ashley. Your father was the scapegoat in his generation, never good enough, always criticized, constantly compared unfavorably to his younger brother. He spent his entire childhood trying to earn his father's approval and never getting it." She sipped her tea slowly. "When your father had children of his own, he was determined to create the perfect family that would prove his worth. But perfect families need contrast. You can't show that someone is special unless someone else is ordinary. You can't demonstrate that your parenting works unless you can point to one child who succeeds and implies that failure is the child's fault, not yours." Eleanor looked at both of us. "He couldn't break the cycle because he never healed from it. He spent his life trying to prove he wasn't the failure his father said he was, and that meant creating the same dynamic with his own children. Victim became perpetrator, and it would have continued through Bianca to Emma if Ashley hadn't stopped it. The 4-generation pattern became visible. My great-grandfather had likely done this to my grandfather. My grandfather did it to my father did it to me, and Bianca was doing it to Emma. The cycle had been running for at least a century, each generation, unconsciously passing trauma to the next, each generation of scapegoats, either breaking under the weight or becoming perpetrators themselves. Understanding this didn't excuse anything, but it reframed the narrative. This wasn't about individual evil, it was about a pattern of damage replicating itself because no one had the awareness or courage to stop it. Until now. Over the following weeks, I watched Emma transform. Bianca started implementing the changes her therapist suggested, equal attention to both children, checking her impulse to favor Mason, actively seeking out Emma's opinions and preferences, making sure Emma got firsts, sometimes first plate at dinner, first choice of activities, first voice heard in conversations. At first, Emma was suspicious, testing whether the changes would last. But gradually, something shifted. Her shoulders straightened. She stopped apologizing for existing. She spoke up more, shared, her opinions took up space. When I saw her at a supervised visit 6 weeks into Bianca's therapy, Emma was smiling, not the careful, placating smile of a child trying to please, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a kid who felt safe. "She's different," I told Bianca during our weekly check-in. "You can see it in her body language." Bianca nodded, crying again. But these were different tears. Tears of relief mixed with grief for the years Emma had spent feeling secondary. "My therapist says it's not too late, that 8 is young enough that Emma can recover fully if I maintain these changes." "It's not too late," I confirmed. "But you have to maintain it. Forever. Not just until Emma seems better, but for the rest of your relationship with her. I will, Bianca said. I have to. I can't let what happened to us happen to her. My phone rang during dinner on a Tuesday evening in late August. Patricia's name on the screen. I excused myself from the table where Sophie and Emma were doing homework together. Yes, Emma had started coming over for homework sessions, a development that felt both strange and right. The court has made its final decision about the Reed Legacy Fund, Patricia said without preamble. You need to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. This is it, Ashley. The final ruling. I arrived at Patricia's office at 8 the next morning, having barely slept. 8 months of legal proceedings, investigations, depositions, and negotiations had all been leading to this moment. Patricia had the official court documents laid out on her conference table, and her expression told me everything before she said a word. You won, she said simply. Full and permanent control of the Reed Legacy Fund. Eleanor named as founding beneficiary and permanent advisory board member. Your parents' appeal was denied. It's over, Ashley. The fund is yours. I sat down hard in one of her conference chairs, not trusting my legs. Patricia slid the judge's written opinion across the table, and I read it with shaking hands. Judge Martinez hadn't just ruled in my favor. She'd delivered a scathing condemnation of everything my parents had done. The actions of Robert and Margaret Reed represent a profound betrayal of both fiduciary duty and familial trust. The opinion read, they took a fund explicitly created to protect vulnerable children within their family and corrupted it into a tool of control and exploitation. They imprisoned the fund's founder, their own mother, while using her name and memory to commit fraud. They systematically abused their daughter while using her identity to legitimize their crimes. The court finds their behavior not merely unethical, but morally reprehensible. The judge went on to validate Eleanor's original vision, completely noting that the fund's purpose to protect overlooked children from family dysfunction had been perfectly realized in my case, just not in the way my parents intended. Ashley Reed fits the criteria Eleanor Reed established with remarkable precision, the overlooked child who succeeded, despite systemic obstacles, who demonstrated resilience, compassion, and integrity in the face of sustained mistreatment. The court is satisfied that returning this fund to its intended purpose under Ms. Ashley Reed's management fulfills the founder's original vision. My parents' attempt to appeal had been dismissed almost contemptuously. The appellate court found no merit whatsoever in their arguments and noted that the evidence of fraud and elder abuse is overwhelming and uncontested. It's really over, I whispered. Patricia smiled. It's really over. The Reed Legacy Fund is yours to manage as you see fit in accordance with Eleanor's original mission. Your parents have no claim, no standing, no voice. You can transform it into exactly what it was meant to be. Over the next 4 weeks, I worked 16-hour days restructuring everything. Eleanor sat beside me through much of it, her mind still sharp despite her physical frailty, offering guidance and approval as I outlined the new vision. The Eleanor Reed Foundation for Family Justice would maintain the original mission of protecting scapegoated children, but with expanded scope and modern understanding. We'd provide scholarships for children from dysfunctional families, but not just for college, for therapy, for legal assistance when needed, for safe housing if they needed to leave toxic environments. We'd partner with family therapists, social workers, and legal advocates who specialized in family systems abuse. I recruited a board that included specialists in generational trauma, a family law attorney who'd spent decades helping children escape abusive homes, 2 adult survivors of scapegoat dynamics who'd gone on to become therapists themselves, and Eleanor, as founding advisor and moral compass. The fund's new mission statement, which I wrote with Eleanor's input, made our purpose crystal clear. The Eleanor Reed Foundation for Family Justice exists to protect, support, and empower children who are scapegoated, overlooked, or systematically mistreated within their families. We believe that family should be a source of safety and love, not trauma and diminishment. When families fail their children, we step in. We break cycles. We build futures. We prove that being overlooked doesn't mean being without value. The Foundation's relaunch event was scheduled for the third Saturday in September, exactly 9 months after that Christmas Eve when everything began. We held it at the same venue where my parents' spring gathering had taken place, a deliberate choice transforming the space where their lies had been exposed into a space where truth would be celebrated. The turnout exceeded our expectations. Over 200 people attended: therapists, social workers, former fund recipients who'd benefited from Eleanor's original vision before my parents corrupted it, community members who'd witnessed the exposure and wanted to support the Foundation's new direction, and perhaps most movingly, dozens of people who came forward to share their own experiences of being scapegoated in their families. Eleanor arrived in her wheelchair, dressed in a deep purple suit that made her look regal despite her frailty. I'd arranged for professional photographers and videographers, not for vanity, but because I wanted this moment documented. I wanted Eleanor to see in high definition what her vision had become. When I took the microphone to speak, I looked out at that crowd and felt the weight of 4 generations of pain lifting from my shoulders. My grandmother, Eleanor Reed, founded the Reed Legacy Fund in 1985 because she'd witnessed generational trauma destroying her family and wanted to protect future generations from the same fate. She saw patterns of scapegoating, favoritism, and systematic mistreatment being passed from parent to child like genetic inheritance. She knew that families could be systems of abuse disguised as love, and she tried to build something that would catch the children who fell through the cracks. I told the story, not all of it, not the most painful details, but enough. I talked about being the scapegoat, about my children inheriting that role, about discovering that the fund meant to protect me had been stolen and corrupted. I talked about finding Eleanor alive after 15 years, about the legal battle, about the choice to transform pain into purpose. Today, we're not just relaunching a fund, I said. We're honoring my grandmother's vision by expanding it for the modern world. The Eleanor Reed Foundation for Family Justice will provide scholarships, therapy, access, legal assistance, and emergency support for children trapped in toxic family systems. We will believe them when they say they're being mistreated. We will validate their experiences. We will help them escape, heal, and build lives that aren't defined by the trauma inflicted on them. The room was silent, except for the sound of people crying. Not sad crying, the kind of crying that happens when someone finally speaks a truth you've been carrying alone. I invited several speakers to share their experiences. A woman in her 60s talked about being the scapegoat in her family and how it took her 40 years to recognize that the problem wasn't her. A therapist explained the psychological mechanisms of scapegoat/golden child dynamics and how they damage everyone involved. A young man, now 23, described being supported by the original Reed Legacy Fund as a teenager, and how that scholarship had quite literally saved his life by giving him a way to leave his abusive home. When Eleanor took the microphone wheeled to the center of the small stage, the room fell into absolute silence. Her voice was thin but steady, amplified by the sound system. I created this fund 70 years ago because I watched my husband destroy my son with constant criticism and impossible standards. I watched my son internalize that abuse and prepare to pass it to his own children. I knew if someone didn't intervene, the cycle would continue forever. I tried to break it with money and legal documents. It wasn't enough. She paused, looking directly at me. But Ashley broke it with courage. She didn't just survive the abuse she exposed, it stopped it and transformed it into something that will help thousands of children I'll never meet. This is my real legacy. Not the fund I created, but the woman who reclaimed it and made it matter. I knelt beside her wheelchair, holding her fragile hand, unable to speak through my tears. Eleanor touched my face the way she'd done the first day I found her and whispered, "You did what I couldn't do. You finished it." During the reception afterward, I made a decision I'd been wrestling with for weeks. I pulled Patricia aside and told her, "I'm keeping the Reed name." She looked surprised. "I thought you might want to distance yourself from—" "It's Eleanor's name," I interrupted. "It's not my parents' name. It's not even really my father's name, it's hers. She built something beautiful and they corrupted it. I'm taking it back." I want the Reed name to mean resilience and cycle breaking and protecting children. I want it to represent what Eleanor tried to do, not what my parents actually did. This is reclamation." Patricia smiled and squeezed my shoulder. "Then you're officially Ashley Reed, director of the Eleanor Reed Foundation for Family Justice." The event was winding down, people lingering in small groups, sharing stories and contact information, when a woman approached me with a press badge clipped to her jacket. "Ms. Reed, I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Herald. I've been covering your story since the spring gathering. I'd like to do a longer feature piece, not just about the legal case, but about generational trauma, about scapegoat dynamics, about how family dysfunction perpetuates itself, and how people can break free. I think your story could help a lot of people who are living similar experiences, but don't have the language or framework to understand what's happening to them." I looked over at Eleanor, who was surrounded by admirers, her face more alive than I'd ever seen it. I thought about Emma, who was playing with Sophie in the corner, both girls laughing freely. I thought about my own daughters who would never inherit the wounds I'd carried. I thought about the hundreds of children who might benefit from the foundation we'd just launched. "Yes," I told the journalist. "Let's tell this story. People need to hear it." The feature article in the Herald ran 2 weeks after the foundation's launch, and it was everything Jennifer Walsh had promised. 8,000 words across 4 full pages, with photographs of Eleanor, quotes from therapists about scapegoat dynamics, and a carefully told version of our family's story that protected my daughter's privacy while illuminating the larger patterns. The response was overwhelming, hundreds of emails from people who'd recognized their own families in the narrative therapy referrals skyrocketing, and 3 other regional papers requesting permission to reprint the piece. But while the foundation celebrated its rebirth, the legal machinery continued grinding toward its inevitable conclusion. The trial date had been set, postponed, then abandoned, when my parents' attorney finally convinced them that going to trial would only result in harsher sentences. In October, 14 months after that Christmas dinner that started everything, they accepted a plea deal. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the first Tuesday in November. Patricia asked if I wanted to attend, and I said yes, not because I wanted to watch them suffer, but because I needed to witness the completion of this chapter. Some stories don't end until you watch them end. The courtroom was smaller than the one where the preliminary hearing had taken place, more institutional and less grand. My parents sat at the defense table with their lawyer, both of them looking diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the courtroom's harsh lighting. My father, who'd always carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, sat with slumped shoulders. My mother, whose social polish had been her armor, looked like someone had removed every bit of shine, leaving only the dull metal underneath. Bianca sat in the gallery separate from them. She'd negotiated her own plea deal weeks earlier, cooperating fully with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. She didn't look at me when I entered, but I saw her hands shaking in her lap. Judge Martinez presided, the same judge who'd handled the civil case. She read the charges with clinical precision: elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, forgery, embezzlement from a charitable organization. Then she read the plea agreement terms. Robert Anthony Reed, you are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison followed by 3 years supervised release. Margaret Ellen Reed, you are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison followed by 2 years supervised release. Both defendants are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $247,000 to Ashley Reed and Eleanor Reed jointly. Both defendants are permanently barred from serving on the board of any charitable organization. The numbers sounded abstract until I did the math. 5 years meant my father would be 71 when he was released. 3 years meant my mother would be 68. They would emerge from prison as elderly people, their health likely deteriorated, their reputations destroyed beyond repair, their social circles scattered. This wasn't just punishment, it was the complete dismantling of the lives they'd built on a foundation of cruelty and fraud. Judge Martinez then addressed Bianca, who stood at her attorney's table. Bianca Reed Hamilton, based on your cooperation with investigators and documented efforts toward rehabilitation, you are sentenced to 5 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and financial penalties totaling $50,000. You will continue court-monitored therapy for the duration of your probation. Violation of any terms will result in immediate incarceration. Bianca's shoulders sagged with relief. She'd been facing potential prison time, and probation felt like mercy she hadn't expected. I'd submitted my victim impact statement in writing rather than reading it in court. I didn't want to perform my pain for an audience, didn't want to give my parents the satisfaction of seeing me cry one last time. The statement was clinical, factual, focused on the impact of their actions rather than the depth of my hurt. Patricia had told me it was one of the most powerful statements she'd ever read precisely because it wasn't emotional. It was just truth laid out without decoration. The courtroom emptied slowly. Relatives I hadn't seen in months emerged from the gallery, some nodding at me with what might have been respect or might have been pity, others pointedly looking away. My mother's sisters walked past me without acknowledgement, their faces set in identical expressions of wounded dignity, as if they were the victims of this entire situation. As the bailiff prepared to escort my parents out, my father turned and looked directly at me. Then he did something I didn't expect. He asked the bailiff if he could speak to me just for a moment. Patricia stiffened beside me, but I nodded. 1 minute. You stay right here. We moved to a corner of the courtroom, far enough from others for privacy, but close enough that Patricia could intervene if needed. My father looked at me for a long moment, and I waited for the apology, for the breakthrough, for some sign that 15 months of consequences had penetrated the armor of his self-justification. Instead, he said, "We were trying to build something, Ashley, a legacy, a name that meant something in this community. You never understood that. You never understood what it takes to create something that lasts." I stared at him, and in that moment, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Not as my father, not as an authority figure, not even as an abuser, just as a deeply damaged man who'd spent his entire life trying to prove to a dead father that he was worthy of love. And in that pursuit, he'd sacrificed his own mother, his daughters, his grandchildren, and ultimately himself. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't understand sacrificing people to build a reputation. I don't understand locking your own mother away and pretending she's dead so you can steal from a fund she created to protect children like me from people like you. I don't understand putting my daughters on the floor with empty plates so you could maintain a hierarchy that made you feel important. I don't understand calling any of that legacy or family values. And you know what I'm grateful I don't understand, because not understanding that kind of cruelty is what it means to be free of it." My father's face went through several expressions: anger, disbelief, perhaps a flash of recognition that he quickly buried. "You've destroyed this family," he said, his voice hardening. "Everything we built, everything you built was a lie," I interrupted. "And lies eventually collapse under their own weight. I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped pretending the lies were true." I turned and walked back to Patricia without waiting for his response. As we left the courtroom, I heard my father being led away by the bailiff, still muttering about legacy and understanding. "That was the closure you needed?" Patricia asked as we walked to her car. "That wasn't closure," I said. "That was confirmation that some people never change, never grow, never see past their own narratives. And that's okay. I don't need him to understand or repent or even acknowledge what he did. I just needed to see that I'm not responsible for his inability to be different." Over the following weeks, the full scope of consequences became visible. The house I'd grown up in, the one with the large dining room where I'd watched my daughters sit on the floor, was sold at auction to pay legal fees and restitution. My father's consulting firm, once prosperous, dissolved as every client quietly withdrew. My mother's name was removed from the boards of 3 charitable organizations, the church committee and the garden club that had once been her social power base. The Reed name, which had opened doors and commanded respect for generations, became synonymous with fraud and abuse. Former friends publicly distanced themselves. Social media accounts went dormant or were deleted. The carefully constructed reputation of civic-minded philanthropy crumbled, replaced by the more accurate story of systematic exploitation. I watched this happen with complex emotions. There was no triumph in seeing my parents lose everything, just a sense of necessary completion, like watching a building that should have been condemned years ago finally being demolished. Some relatives reached out with apologies for enabling the dysfunction for so long. Others blamed me for destroying the family, choosing comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, even when faced with overwhelming evidence. On a gray afternoon in late November, I returned home from a foundation board meeting to find an envelope tucked into my front door. It was a standard white envelope sealed with a sticker and marked in Sophie's careful handwriting, "For Mom, please read when you're alone." My hands started shaking before I even opened it. I waited until both girls were asleep before opening the envelope. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink, staring at Sophie's handwriting on the front, somehow knowing that whatever was inside would change something fundamental in how I understood the past year. The letter was written on lined notebook paper, the kind Sophie used for school assignments, and it was dated across several weeks, started in October, added to in November, sealed just yesterday. Her handwriting was careful, more formal than her usual quick scrawl, as if she'd understood the weight of what she was documenting. "Dear Mom," it began, "I need to tell you something I've been keeping secret, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I was scared, and I didn't know if I was doing the right thing." My hands started shaking. When I was 9 years old, right after Emma was born, I started noticing how Grandma and Grandpa talked to you. The way their voices changed when you walked in the room. The way they smiled at Aunt Bianca and frowned at you. The way they acted like Emma and I were invisible unless they were criticizing us or telling us to wait for something. I asked you about it once and you said that's just how they were, that I shouldn't worry about it. But I did worry. Because I could see it hurt you even when you pretended it didn't. I had to stop reading for a moment, pressing my hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound that would wake the girls upstairs. So I started recording them. I had my old phone, the one you let me keep for games, even though it didn't have service anymore. I figured out how to turn on the voice recorder, and I started hiding it under tables or in my pocket when we went to their house. At first, I was just collecting evidence in case something happened, and you needed proof. I recorded 53 different times over 2 years. Every Christmas, every birthday, every Sunday dinner, where they made us feel small. 53 times. My 11-year-old daughter had spent 2 years documenting abuse, carrying that burden alone, trying to protect me the only way she knew how. The recordings were bad, Mom, really bad. Grandma calling you worthless when she thought we couldn't hear. Grandpa saying you were a disappointment and an embarrassment. Aunt Bianca laughing when they made fun of you. And the way they talked about Emma and me like we were problems they had to deal with instead of people they loved. I kept all of it on an SD card and I hid it in my room. I remembered the day Patricia had asked if the girls might have any relevant information for the case. Sophie had gone very quiet, then asked if she could speak to Patricia alone. They'd been in Patricia's office for over an hour, and when they emerged, Patricia's expression had been a mixture of admiration and sadness. She'd told me Sophie had provided important evidence, but that the specifics were protected by attorney-client privilege until the case was resolved. I'd assumed it was testimony, maybe some witnessed conversations. I'd never imagined this. When your lawyer asked me for a witness statement last year, I finally told her about the recordings. I gave her the SD card with everything on it. She said it was some of the most important evidence in the whole case because it proved the pattern went back years and that I was a direct witness to the abuse. They used it in court, Mom. My recordings helped prove what Grandma and Grandpa did to you. The letter blurred as tears filled my eyes. I thought about 9-year-old Sophie, small and scared, hiding a phone under Thanksgiving tables and Christmas dinner settings documenting cruelty, because she understood even then that sometimes the truth needs to be recorded, because people won't believe it otherwise. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared they'd hurt you worse if they knew I was recording. I was scared you'd stop taking us there and I wouldn't be able to get more proof in case you needed it someday. I was scared I'd done something wrong by recording people without telling them. But Patricia said I did the right thing, that what I recorded helped protect you and helped make sure they couldn't lie about what happened. The letter's tone shifted then, becoming less apologetic and more certain. I want you to know something, Mom. Even when Grandma and Grandpa were mean to you, even when they made you feel small, even when they acted like you didn't matter, I always knew you were the strongest person in any room. I saw how you went to work every day and took care of us and made sure we had everything we needed without help from anyone. I saw how you never talked bad about them even when they deserved it. I saw how you protected Emma and me even when it cost you. You taught me what strong looks like. You taught me what love looks like. You taught me that walking away from people who hurt you isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Thank you for being brave enough to fight even when you were scared. I love you. Sophie. I sat at that table and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry through the entire ordeal. Not tears of pain or anger or even relief, but tears of gratitude and awe for this child. I'd raised this young person who'd seen clearly, acted courageously, and somehow understood at 9 years old what had taken me 35 years to learn. The recording Sophie made had indeed been crucial. Patricia told me later that prosecutors had used them to establish the pattern and duration of abuse to prove that the mistreatment wasn't isolated incidents, but systematic and ongoing. Several of Sophie's recordings had captured my parents discussing keeping Ashley in her place and making sure she doesn't get too confident, direct evidence of intentional psychological abuse. Another recording had caught my father telling my mother that they needed to deal with the Ashley problem before she starts asking questions about the fund. My daughter had built the foundation of the criminal case, one secret recording at a time, driven by a child's fierce love for her mother and an innate sense of justice that no one had taught her. She'd simply possessed it. The broader impact of our story emerged gradually then, all at once. Jennifer Walsh's feature article in the Herald, "The Scapegoat Who Saved Herself," was picked up by wire services and republished in newspapers across the country. Within a week, it had been shared over 50,000 times on social media. My inbox flooded with emails, hundreds, then thousands, from people recognizing their own families in the narrative. A woman in Oregon wrote, "I'm 62 years old, and I've spent my entire life thinking something was wrong with me, because my sister was the favorite and I was the disappointment. Your story gave me the language to understand that it wasn't me. It was never me." And a man in Florida described being the scapegoat's son in a family that worshipped his younger brother, writing, "I cut contact with them 15 years ago and have felt guilty every single day since. Your story made me realize I did the right thing. Thank you for giving me permission to protect myself." Therapists contacted me asking for permission to share the article with clients. Support groups formed online specifically for adult scapegoats trying to process their experiences. Universities invited me to speak to psychology students about family systems and generational trauma. I was simultaneously overwhelmed and humbled by the response. Eleanor read every letter that came to the foundation, and there were hundreds. People sent donations in honor of their own lost childhoods, scholarship applications from young people trying to escape toxic families, thank you notes from adults who'd found validation in our story. One afternoon, sitting in her assisted living apartment surrounded by letters, Eleanor told me, "You've given them their voices back. All these people who thought they were alone, who thought maybe they were imagining it or deserving it, you showed them they weren't crazy. That's the real legacy, Ashley. Not the money, not the scholarships, not even breaking the cycle in our family. You gave thousands of people the language and permission to name what was done to them." I accepted a few speaking engagements, though the attention made me uncomfortable. At a conference on family trauma in Boston, I stood before 200 therapists and social workers and told our story. Afterward, a woman in her 70s approached me crying. "I was the scapegoat in my family," she said. "I'm 74 years old, and I've never said that out loud before. I thought I had to take it to my grave. Thank you for showing me I don't. The story became larger than me, larger than my family, larger than I'd ever intended. It became a mirror where thousands of people saw themselves reflected, perhaps for the first time. And in seeing themselves, they began to heal. 1 week before Christmas, exactly. 1 year after the night everything began. I was in my kitchen making dinner when the doorbell rang. Sophie answered it before I could, and I heard her say, "Hi, Aunt Bianca. Hi, Emma." I walked to the door and found Bianca standing on my porch holding Emma's hand. Both of them looked nervous. Emma was clutching something, a wrapped present, small and carefully decorated with hand-drawn snowflakes. "I'm sorry to come by without calling," Bianca said, her voice tentative. "But Emma wanted to give you something, and I thought maybe we could talk." I looked at Bianca standing on my porch with Emma, both of them vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before, and made a decision. "Come in, it's cold out there." Emma brightened immediately, stepping inside with the careful politeness of a child who's learning that her presence is welcome, but hasn't quite internalized it yet. She handed me the wrapped present with both hands. "I made this for you," she said softly. "Mom helped me, but I did most of it." I opened it carefully. Inside was a painted picture frame, Emma's artwork, covering every inch of it with flowers and stars and words in careful lettering. "Family is who loves you." And in the frame was a photograph I recognized from the Foundation's relaunch event, Eleanor, me, Sophie, Emma, and even Bianca, all of us standing together, smiling. "Emma wanted you to have it," Bianca said quietly. "For Christmas. If that's okay." I looked at the frame, at my niece's hopeful face, at my sister's tentative expression, and felt something shift. "It's more than okay. Thank you, Emma. This is beautiful." That conversation led to another and another until we arrived at tonight, Christmas Eve. Exactly 1 year after the night, everything shattered and began to rebuild. My house was nothing like the mansion I'd grown up in. It was modest, comfortable, decorated with ornaments my daughters had made in elementary school, rather than designer pieces chosen for maximum visual impact. The tree was slightly crooked because Sophie and I had cut it ourselves at a local farm. The table was my grandmother Eleanor's, not my parents' grandmother, but my maternal grandmother's table. The one piece of furniture from that side of the family I'd inherited carried its own history of dysfunction, but now repurposed for something better. The guest list was small. Eleanor arrived first, wheeled in by her nurse wrapped in a deep green shawl that made her look like winter royalty despite her frailty. Marlene came next, the 73-year-old friend who'd given me permission to walk away all those months ago. My Uncle James and his wife Martha arrived with a pie and apologies for being late. Bianca and Emma were last, both carrying dishes they'd prepared, Bianca's first attempt at contributing rather than simply receiving. There were no assigned seats, no head of the table, no places of honor, no hierarchy of importance. Everyone chose where to sit, and somehow we ended up in a configuration that felt right. Eleanor at one end, not because she was most important, but because her wheelchair fit best there. Sophie and Emma sitting together, because they'd become genuine friends during Emma's weekly visits for homework and healing. Bianca next to me, not because we were close, but because we were learning to exist in proximity without destruction. The meal was potluck, nothing fancy. Everyone had brought something, everyone had contributed, and no one ate until everyone was served. This last part was intentional, something I'd insisted on. Emma noticed it immediately, watched carefully as we waited for the last person to get food before anyone picked up a fork. When Sophie explained, "We all eat together, everyone's first." Emma's eyes filled with tears of understanding. Before we ate, Eleanor asked if she could say something. We all turned to her and she raised her water glass with a trembling hand. Her voice was thin but steady, carrying the weight of 83 years and 4 generations of witnessed pain. "This is the Christmas I dreamed of when I was young," she began. "When I first saw how my husband treated our children and knew it would pass to the next generation if no one stopped it. I tried to stop it with that fund, with legal documents, with money set aside for protection. But I wasn't strong enough. I got sick before I could finish what I started, and they buried me alive while stealing everything I'd built. She paused, looking directly at me. Ashley was strong enough. She did what 3 generations of Reed women couldn't do. She broke the cycle completely. Not just for herself, but for her children, for Emma, maybe for children we'll never meet who'll benefit from the foundation. And now we sit here truly as family, because we choose to be here. Not because we're obligated, not because we're trapped, but because we want to be. That's what family should be. We raised our glasses water for the children, wine for the adults. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of what we'd accomplished and what it had cost. My parents were in prison, serving sentences they'd earned through decades of cruelty and fraud. The extended family was fractured, some supporting me, others cutting contact, entirely unable to reconcile their loyalty to the family name with the truth of what that name had represented. The Reed family, as it had existed for generations, was gone, replaced by something smaller, more honest, and infinitely more real. The evening unfolded with the gentle chaos of people learning to be together without performance. Emma laughed, actually laughed, when Sophie told a story about a mishap at school, and the sound was so free and unguarded that Bianca had to excuse herself to the bathroom for a moment. When she came back, her eyes were red, but her expression was lighter. Marlene cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting dessert. "You did it, sweetheart," she said, squeezing my arm. "You did what I couldn't. You walked away while you were still young enough to build something new." "I had help," I said, looking through the doorway at Eleanor laughing with my daughters. I had her voice reaching across time, trying to protect me before I was born. And I had Sophie documenting everything because she understood I might need proof someday. And I had you telling me it was okay to choose myself. I didn't do this alone. "No one should have to," Marlene said. "That's what made it wrong. They made you fight alone for 35 years. But when you finally fought back, you had an army." As people prepared to leave, bundling into coats and gathering dishes, Emma came up to me and said very seriously, "Aunt Ashley, thank you for helping my mom learn to be better. She's different now, I can tell." I knelt down to Emma's eye level. "Your mom is doing that work herself, Emma. She's choosing to change. That's the hardest thing anyone can do, admit they were wrong and actually change their behavior. I'm proud of her for doing it, and I'm proud of you for being patient while she learns." Emma nodded, then hugged me quickly before running back to her mother. I watched them leave together, Bianca's hand on Emma's shoulder in a way that looked protective rather than controlling, and I felt hope. Not certainty. I knew backsliding was possible, knew that learned behaviors had deep roots, but hope that this one child might escape the cycle that had caught so many before her. After everyone left, I stood in my kitchen doing dishes that didn't need doing, just wanting a quiet moment to process. Snow was falling outside, visible through the window above the sink, coating everything in clean white. Sophie appeared beside me, leaning against the counter. "Are you sad, Mom?" she asked. I considered the question honestly, not defaulting to reassurance or platitude. "I'm sad about what was lost," I said slowly. "I'm sad that my parents chose cruelty over love, that they spent their lives building something hollow that collapsed when truth touched it. I'm sad that so many years were wasted on pain that didn't have to happen. I'm sad that there won't be any fairy tale reconciliation or movie moment where they suddenly understand and apologize." Sophie waited, knowing there was more. "But I'm grateful for what we built instead. This house, this Christmas, this table where everyone ate at the same time. I'm grateful that you and Emma will never sit on floors with empty plates waiting for scraps. I'm grateful for Eleanor surviving long enough to see this. I'm grateful for the foundation helping kids who are where I used to be. I'm grateful that you're growing up knowing your worth instead of having to discover it at 35. Sophie wrapped her arms around me, and we stood there for a moment, mother and daughter. Two people who'd survived something together and come out stronger for it. Later, after Sophie went to bed, I stood in my living room looking at the Christmas tree we'd decorated together. It was imperfect, lovely, covered in ornaments that told our story, handmade decorations from when the girls were small, a few pieces from Eleanor's apartment that she'd insisted I take a new ornament from this year's foundation launch. On top was a star Sophie had made slightly crooked perfect. I thought about last Christmas Eve standing on my parents' porch watching through windows as they prepared to humiliate my children. I thought about the moment I'd finally said enough, and meant it. I thought about everything that had happened since the investigation, the exposure, the legal battles, the slow, painful work of breaking cycles and building new patterns. The victory wasn't that bad people got punished, though they had. The victory wasn't that I'd reclaimed the fund, though I had. The victory wasn't even that justice was served, though it was. The victory was this: my children were safe. They were loved without conditions. They were growing up with the knowledge that they mattered, that their voices counted, that they didn't have to earn basic dignity through perfect behavior. They would have their own struggles, everyone does, but they wouldn't have mine. The cycle that had run through at least 4 generations of my family had stopped. With me. Tonight, I looked at that crooked star on top of our imperfect tree, at the presents underneath, wrapped in paper my daughters had chosen, at the stockings hung with everyone's names, including Eleanor's, and I thought, this year everyone ate first. And from now on, everyone always will. Outside snow continued falling, covering everything, the past, the pain, the graves of relationships that couldn't survive truth in clean white possibility. Inside my home was warm, filled with the lingering scent of dinner and the promise of morning. I turned off the tree lights and headed upstairs to bed, not sad, not angry, not triumphant, just free. And so Ashley Reed's journey came full circle. From that cold Christmas Eve, when she watched her children sit on the floor with empty plates, to this warm Christmas Eve, where everyone sat at the same table, equally valued and equally loved. It took 14 months, countless sleepless nights, legal battles, and the courage to face her entire family system. But she did it. She broke a cycle that had run through at least 4 generations of her family. And in doing so, she gave not just her own children, but countless others the gift of freedom from inherited trauma. Ashley's parents are serving prison sentences for their crimes. Bianca is rebuilding her relationship with her daughter through therapy and genuine change. The Reed family name, once synonymous with prestige and philanthropy, has been redefined to mean resilience, truth-telling, and cycle-breaking. The Eleanor Reed Foundation for Family Justice now helps hundreds of children escape toxic family systems, providing them with resources Ashley never had when she needed them most. And Eleanor herself, the grandmother who tried to build protection into the future, lived to see her vision finally realized. But this story isn't really about revenge, though justice was served. It's not really about money or legal battles, though those were necessary. This story is about something much deeper. Something that resonates with so many of us who've lived through family dysfunction and wondered if we were crazy, if we were imagining things, if maybe we really were the problem. Here's what I want you to take away from Ashley's story. The lesson that matters more than any courtroom victory or financial settlement. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by behavior. You don't owe loyalty to people who harm you, no matter what they call themselves. Mother, father, sister, brother, grandmother, grandfather. These are titles, not free passes to abuse. Real family protects you, supports you, celebrates your success without diminishment, and loves you without conditions. And when the people who share your DNA can't do that, it's not just okay to walk away. It's wisdom. It's self-preservation. It's the first step toward healing. For those of you watching this who recognize your own family in Ashley's story, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not imagining it. You're not too sensitive. You're not overreacting. If you've spent your life being treated as less than your siblings, if your achievements are minimized while others' mediocrity is celebrated, if you're always the one expected to sacrifice while others are protected, if your children are being taught they matter less than their cousins, you're experiencing something real. It has a name. It's called scapegoating, and it's a form of abuse that leaves wounds just as deep as physical violence, even though they're harder to see. And here's the other truth. Ashley's story teaches us. It's never too late to choose yourself. Ashley was 35 years old when she finally said enough. Some of you watching might be 50, 60, 70, thinking it's too late to establish boundaries or walk away from toxic family members. It's not. You deserve peace in whatever years you have left. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation and fear. You deserve to stop carrying shame for things that were never your fault. Breaking generational cycles is hard, painful work. It means accepting that some relationships can't be saved. It means choosing truth over comfort, justice over peace, boundaries over belonging. It means disappointing people who've never been willing to examine their own behavior. But the alternative, passing that same trauma to your children and grandchildren, watching them inherit wounds you could have prevented, that's infinitely worse. Ashley's story also reminds us that change is possible, but only for those willing to do the work. Bianca, the golden child who'd benefited from the toxic system her entire life, was able to recognize her own patterns and commit to changing them. She'll never be close with Ashley again. That ship has sailed, but she's breaking the cycle with her own daughter, and that matters. It shows us that even people who've been complicit in dysfunction can choose differently if they're willing to face uncomfortable truths about themselves. If Ashley's story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced scapegoat dynamics in your own family? Have you had to make the difficult choice to walk away from toxic relationships? What helped you find the courage to establish boundaries? Your stories matter, and sharing them helps others feel less alone. And if you found value in this story, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes people need permission to protect themselves, and your share might be exactly what gives them that permission. Remember, you're not responsible for fixing people who broke themselves. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And choosing your own well-being over family dysfunction isn't selfish. It's survival. It's wisdom. It's the beginning of healing. This is Ashley Reed's story, but it might also be yours. And if it is, I hope it gives you the courage to write your own ending, one where you finally eat first.